Hello, welcome to Nytheric Horror. Tonight, enjoy 3 hours of true scary stories, mysterious encounters, and disturbing experiences. Ads may play during the first 15 minutes and after 2:30 sounded, with no mid-roll ads in between. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the nightmare begin. I was 15 when my parents bought the house outside a small town in western Pennsylvania. I'm in my 30s now, and they still live there. I visit them a few times a year, usually around Christmas or during the summer, and I can honestly say I don't hate the place anymore. Most of the house has been renovated. The roof is new, the old wiring is gone, the floors have been refinished, and the yard that used to look like an abandoned field is now something my mother is proud of. There is only one part of the house I still avoid. It's a small side porch attached to the kitchen. My parents barely use it either, although neither of them will admit there is a reason. The house was built in 1908. It sits on a hill above a 2-lane state road with woods behind the property and an old stone retaining wall along the southern edge. From the road, it looks taller than it really is because the basement is partly above ground on the downhill side. The front of the house has a wide covered porch, which is where everyone naturally sits. The small porch beside the kitchen makes almost no sense by comparison. It has no roof, no good view, and no direct path to the driveway. It's basically a square wooden platform about 4 feet above the ground with a short set of steps leading into the backyard. Underneath it is a dark space enclosed by wooden lattice. Behind that lattice is part of the stone basement foundation. When my parents bought the place, the house had been empty for almost 9 years. They got it cheaply because it needed everything. The plumbing leaked. Half the windows were painted shut. Several upstairs rooms still had old cloth-covered electrical wiring running through the walls. The kitchen floor sagged near the pantry. There was water damage in the dining room ceiling, and the basement smelled like wet stone, rust, and old heating oil, even though the oil tank had been removed years earlier. We didn't move in right away. For almost a year, weekends became workdays at the new house. My father would load tools into the truck on Saturday mornings. My mother would pack sandwiches and drinks into a cooler. And my younger brother Evan and I would spend 8 or 9 hours finding ways not to get in their way. I hated those weekends. At the time, we were living with my grandmother in a clean little ranch house closer to Pittsburgh. I had friends within walking distance. I knew every street in the neighborhood. I could ride my bike to school, to the basketball courts, or to the convenience store. More importantly, that house had been my grandfather's. He had died 7 months before my parents bought the old place. My grandfather, Frank, was probably the most important adult in my life when I was growing up. My father and I got along, but Dad worked long shifts and was often exhausted when he got home. Grandpa was the one who taught me how to fish, change a bicycle tire, sharpen a pocket knife, and drive a riding mower without destroying the fence. He was patient in a way most adults weren't. He also had this small habit I still remember better than almost anything else about him. Whenever he came into a room where I was studying or watching television, he would tap twice on the doorframe with his knuckles before walking in. Not because he needed permission, it was just something he did. 2 quick knocks. Then he would lean around the doorway and say something like, "You busy?" I don't know why that detail stayed with me so strongly after he died. Maybe because grief attaches itself to useless little things. The last time I saw him alive, I was angry with him. It wasn't over anything important. I wanted to go somewhere with friends, and he had promised my parents he would keep me home because I had missed an assignment at school. I said some ugly teenage things to him. I told him he wasn't my father and needed to stop acting like he was. He didn't argue. He just nodded and left my room. He died from a heart attack the next afternoon while I was at school. I never apologized. That stayed with me for years. The only thing of his I asked for after the funeral was his watch. It was an old mechanical Timex with a scratched silver case and a dark brown leather strap. The crystal had a thin crack across one corner. Grandpa had worn it almost every day. It had stopped the morning he died. My grandmother offered to have it repaired, but I said no. I liked it the way it was. The hands were frozen at 10:17. I kept it in a small wooden box beside my bed. When we started working on the new house, I sometimes brought the watch with me in my backpack. I know that probably sounds strange, but I was 15 and miserable about moving. Having one of Grandpa's things nearby made those long days easier. The first incident happened in late August, several months before we officially moved in. It was hot and humid. My father was replacing damaged cabinets in the kitchen, and my mother was stripping several layers of wallpaper in the dining room. Evan was 8. He had discovered wild blackberries growing along the fence behind the house, and he spent most of that afternoon filling a plastic cup with them. I was sitting on the side porch outside the kitchen. I had a paperback with me, though I don't remember what I was reading. The kitchen door behind me was open because Dad was going in and out for tools. From where I sat, I could see Evan near the fence about 20 feet away. There was steady traffic on the road below the hill, but it wasn't loud enough to make conversation difficult. I remember hearing Dad drop something inside the kitchen. Then, the sound of his drill. Then, everything seemed normal again. A few minutes later, someone spoke directly behind me. The voice was male, not loud, not whispered either. It sounded close enough that my first reaction was to move forward because I thought someone was standing directly over my shoulder. The voice said, "You hear me, right?" I turned around. Nobody was there. The kitchen doorway was empty. I could see through the kitchen into the narrow pantry on the far wall. My father wasn't there either. Before I could say anything, the voice came again. This time, it sounded slightly lower, as though whoever was speaking had crouched down. "Look down here." I stood immediately. There was no doubt in my mind that I had heard someone. I stepped into the kitchen and called for Dad. He answered from the basement. The basement stairs were on the opposite side of the kitchen, beside the pantry. I walked over and looked down. He was near the furnace with a work light, probably 30 feet from where I had been sitting. I asked if he had called me. He said no. I went back outside. Evan was still picking berries. I asked him if he had heard someone talking. He looked at me and said, "Yeah." I asked what he heard. He shrugged. "Some guy." That bothered me more than if he had said nothing. I asked where he thought the voice came from. Evan pointed toward the porch. Under there, maybe he immediately went back to the berries. Children can be strangely casual about things adults would obsess over. I walked down the porch steps and stood in the grass. The lattice underneath was old and partly broken. There were enough gaps that I could see into the space below the porch. There was nothing there. Just dirt, stones, some dead leaves, and one section of the basement foundation. Near the center was an old rectangular basement window that had been covered from the inside with plywood. I called through the lattice. Nobody answered. I walked around the porch twice. There was nowhere for anyone to hide without me seeing them. Eventually, I told my father. He came outside, looked underneath with a flashlight, and found nothing. He said it was probably someone on the road. That explanation made sense. Sound carries strangely around old houses and hills. A driver could have stopped below the property. Someone could have been yelling from another yard. I accepted that. Mostly, a few weeks later, something happened that I didn't connect to the voice at first. Dad had started repairing the pantry. The pantry was narrow, maybe 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide. It was directly across from the kitchen door leading to the side porch. Its back wall was part of the exterior wall of the house. To the left of the pantry was the basement door. There was an old built-in shelving unit inside the pantry, and Dad decided to remove it because the wood had rotted near the floor. Behind the shelving, he found a shallow gap between the plaster and the outside wall. Nothing unusual for an old house. But after he pulled the shelves away, he noticed marks in the dust. They looked like fingerprints, not full handprints, just curved impressions along the edge of one board. Dad assumed they were from whoever had installed the shelves. Then he called me over. He thought the shape was funny. There were 4 finger marks on one side of the board. On the other side, instead of a single thumbprint, there appeared to be 2. Dad laughed and held his own hand against the wood, trying to figure out how someone could have gripped it that way. He decided 2 different people must have handled the board. That was probably true. I didn't think much about it. A month later, the old watch disappeared. We were working at the house on a Sunday. I had brought my backpack and left it in what would eventually become my bedroom upstairs. At some point that afternoon, I went to get the watch. The wooden box was in the backpack. The watch wasn't. I emptied everything onto the floor. Nothing. I searched the room, the hallway, the stairs, the kitchen, and the porch. I accused Evan of taking it. He denied it. I didn't believe him. I became furious. I yelled at him until my mother intervened. She made me apologize, but I wasn't sincere about it. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept checking his pockets and looking through the places he had been playing. The watch never appeared. I cried in the car on the way back to Grandma's house, although I did it quietly so nobody would notice. It felt like losing Grandpa again. 3 days later, Dad found the watch. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, right beside the door to the side porch. Nobody admitted putting it there. Evan swore he hadn't touched it. Mom assumed I had misplaced it. Dad thought maybe it had fallen into a box of tools and he had accidentally carried it downstairs. I wanted to believe that. There was one detail I didn't mention. The watch was ticking. I noticed it when I picked it up, very faintly. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand was moving. I stood in the kitchen, staring at it. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, it stopped. The hands settled again at 10:17, exactly where they had been before. I told myself mechanical watches can behave strangely. Maybe being moved had temporarily restarted something. I put it back in the box. I stopped bringing it to the house. By December, we moved in. My bedroom was on the second floor at the back of the house, directly above the kitchen. Evan's room was across the hallway above the dining room. My parents slept in the large bedroom at the front. The bathroom was between their room and ours. At the end of the upstairs hallway was a narrow door leading to unfinished attic stairs. The basement could only be reached through the kitchen. That layout matters because for the next several months, almost everything strange happened around the kitchen, pantry, basement stairs, and side porch. The first few weeks were normal. The house made noise constantly, but old houses do that. Radiators clicked, pipes knocked, floorboards shifted when the heat came on, wind pressed against loose storm windows. The basement sump pump sometimes made a grinding sound that traveled through the walls. I gradually learned what each noise meant. That actually made the unusual sounds easier to identify. The first one I couldn't explain was knocking. 2 quick taps, always from downstairs. The first time I heard it, I was in my bedroom doing homework. Tap, tap. I stopped writing. Nothing followed. About 10 minutes later, it happened again. Tap, tap, It sounded like someone hitting the kitchen doorframe with their knuckles. My stomach tightened immediately. I thought of Grandpa. For several days, I didn't tell anyone. Part of me didn't want an explanation. That is difficult for me to admit. I had spent months telling myself I didn't believe in ghosts. I still don't know if I do. But grief isn't rational. There was a small part of me that wanted those knocks to be him. I started listening for them. That was my mistake. They came maybe once or twice a week, usually late in the evening. Never when the television was loud. Never when people were talking. Only during those quiet moments when the whole house seemed settled. Tap, tap, sometimes from the kitchen, sometimes from the pantry, once from directly beneath my bedroom floor. I never heard a voice with them. Then, Evan mentioned it. We were eating cereal one morning when he asked Mom why Dad kept knocking on the pantry door at night. Dad looked confused. Evan demonstrated. 2 taps. Exactly the same rhythm. My mother glanced at me because she knew what Grandpa used to do. Nobody said his name. Dad blamed the heating pipes. For a while, that was enough. Then the pantry door started opening. It had a simple brass latch, not a lock. You turned the handle, and the latch pulled back. At night, my mother always closed it, because we kept food inside and had recently found mouse droppings. Several mornings we found it standing open. Dad adjusted the latch. It happened again. He replaced the latch. It still happened. One Saturday morning, we found something else. A 5-pound bag of flour had fallen from the lower shelf during the night and split across the pantry floor. There were marks in the flour. My mother saw them first. She called Dad. Then she told Evan and me to stay out of the kitchen. Of course, we looked anyway. There were 6 impressions leading from the back wall of the pantry toward the door. They weren't normal footprints. They looked more like someone had pressed the narrow edge of a bare heel into the flour, lifted it, then done it again. Each mark was maybe 4 inches long. What made them strange was where they began. The first impression touched the wall. There was no empty space between the wall and the first mark. It looked as if whoever had made them had stepped directly out of the plaster. Dad photographed everything before cleaning it. He checked the pantry wall and floor for holes. Nothing. He went outside and examined the foundation. Nothing. He removed the plywood covering the old basement window beneath the side porch. The window behind it had been broken years earlier and blocked with bricks from the inside. There was no opening large enough for a person. Dad started talking about raccoons. My mother pointed out that raccoons didn't wear shoes. Dad said they didn't look like shoe prints either. That conversation ended without an answer. By February, I no longer wanted the knocking to be Grandpa. It had changed. Instead of 2 taps, there would sometimes be a third. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Grandpa had never done that. I know how insignificant that sounds. But the extra knock frightened me more than the original 2. It felt like something practicing. The house also started developing a smell near the pantry. Not decay, not sewage. It smelled like damp soil mixed with warm metal. My father checked the drains. A plumber inspected the kitchen. Nothing was leaking. The smell would appear for 10 or 15 minutes and then disappear. Around the same time, I began feeling pressure in my ears whenever I passed the basement door. It was similar to driving down a steep hill. My hearing would dull slightly. Then I would swallow, and it would clear. Nobody else complained about it. I started avoiding the kitchen at night. One evening in March, I came downstairs for water around 1 in the morning. The kitchen light was off, but the small light above the stove was on. I poured water at the sink. Behind me, something touched the pantry door. Not knocked. Dragged. A slow scrape from top to bottom. I froze. The sound came again. longer this time. I turned around. The pantry door was closed. I could see the brass handle. It moved, very slightly. Down, then up. I remember putting the glass on the counter because my hand had started shaking. I walked toward the pantry. I got within maybe 6 feet. The handle moved again. Down, up, someone was trying it from inside. I called for Dad. The handle stopped immediately. My father came downstairs carrying a baseball bat. He opened the pantry. Empty, he checked behind the shelves. Nothing, he checked the basement. Nothing, the exterior doors were locked. Every window on the first floor was closed. Dad searched the house for almost 20 minutes. He found nobody. That was the first night he stopped giving explanations. He didn't say the house was haunted. He simply told me that if anything happened again, I should wake him instead of investigating alone. A week later, he installed a small motion alarm on the side porch door. It was meant for windows. If the door opened while the alarm was switched on, it made a loud electronic beep. For several nights, nothing happened. Then at 2:43 one morning, the alarm went off. Everyone woke up. Dad reached the kitchen first. The door was still locked. The alarm had separated from its magnetic contact, even though the door hadn't opened. The strange part was where the contact was. Dad found it on the pantry floor. The adhesive strip had been torn away from the doorframe. There were 2 small dents in the plastic, one on each side. They looked like thumbprints pressed into soft material, except there were 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Dad stared at those marks for a long time. He didn't throw the alarm away. He put it in a drawer. As far as I know, he still has it. By then, Evan had become frightened, too. He stopped going into the kitchen alone after dark. One night, he came into my room and asked if he could sleep on my floor. I asked why. He said someone had been standing outside his bedroom. I asked what they looked like. He said he hadn't seen anyone. He had only seen the bottom of the door move. His bedroom door had a small gap beneath it. He said something had blocked the hallway light for several seconds. Then, he heard 2 taps on the wall. I let him sleep in my room. Around 3 in the morning, I woke because Evan was sitting upright. He was staring at my bedroom door. I listened. Nothing. Then came 2 quiet knocks. Not from the door, from inside my closet. Tap, tap, Evan grabbed my arm. I turned on the lamp. The closet door was closed. Neither of us moved for maybe a minute. Then there was a 3rd knock. Tap, I woke my parents. Dad checked the closet. Nothing, but when he opened it, we smelled wet soil. My grandfather's watch was on the floor. I hadn't seen it in months. I had left the wooden box containing it at Grandma's house because I didn't want it in the new place. I knew that. I was certain. The following morning, I called my grandmother. I asked her to check my old room. The wooden box was still there. Empty. That was when the whole thing changed for me. Until then, I had been afraid of the house. After that, I felt targeted. Someone could have taken the watch from Grandma's house. Logically, that explanation existed. My parents still had keys. Evan visited her. I visited her. But nobody had any reason to do it. My mother accused me gently of sleepwalking. I had never sleepwalked before. Dad didn't say much. He put the watch inside his locked toolbox in the garage. 2 days later, it disappeared from the toolbox. The lock wasn't broken. Dad kept the key on his key ring. The watch was never found. Spring came. Things quieted down. For nearly 2 months, nothing happened beyond occasional noises. I started relaxing. Then came the night that finally convinced my parents something was seriously wrong. It was early May. A storm had been moving through the area since afternoon. Not a dramatic thunderstorm, just steady cold rain and wind. Dad and Mom drove into town after dinner because a section of gutter had come loose, and Dad wanted supplies before the hardware store closed. Evan and I stayed home. I was 16 by then. There was no reason we couldn't be alone for an hour. Evan was upstairs playing a video game. I was in the dining room doing homework. Around 8:30, the furnace shut off. I noticed because the house became unusually quiet. A minute later, I heard a click from the kitchen. Then another. I assumed the furnace breaker had tripped. Dad had shown me how to reset it. I texted him. He replied that I could check the panel, but should leave it alone if anything looked wrong. The electrical panel was in the basement. I walked into the kitchen. Immediately, I smelled damp soil. Strongly, it seemed to be coming from the pantry. I stopped. The pantry door was open about 6 inches. I knew I had closed it after dinner. I called upstairs for Evan. He answered. I asked if he had been downstairs. He said no. I closed the pantry door. Then I opened the basement door and switched on the stairlight. The basement stairs went down along the north wall. At the bottom, the furnace was to the left. The electrical panel was mounted on the wall beside it. I could see the panel from halfway down. I started descending. When I reached the 4th step, I heard something behind me. Tap, tap. I stopped. My mouth went dry. There was a pause. Then one more. Tap. I turned. The kitchen was visible through the open basement doorway. Nobody was there. Then, I heard something I hadn't heard since the previous summer. A man's voice. It came from the pantry. You still hear me? Not a question this time. The tone was calm, almost conversational. I ran upstairs. I slammed the basement door and called Evan. He came into the hallway. I told him to get his shoes. He asked what happened. I said we were going outside and waiting for Mom and Dad. I grabbed my phone and keys. Then the kitchen door to the side porch opened. The alarm Dad had installed months earlier was no longer there, but the door had a deadbolt. I had locked it after dinner. I remembered doing it. Now the door was standing open. Rain blew across the kitchen floor. Cold air rushed through the room. I could see the dark porch beyond it. Evan was halfway down the stairs behind me. I told him to stay there. I didn't approach the porch. Instead, I moved toward the front hallway so we could leave through the main door. That was when something hit the pantry wall from inside. Hard, the shelves shook. A jar fell and shattered. Then another impact came from the wall. Not the door. The wall itself. The plaster bowed outward. I remember seeing a crack appear near the baseboard. Evan started crying. I yelled at him to go to the front door. He ran. I followed. Before I reached the dining room, the pantry door slammed open. Something came through it. I have spent years trying to describe what I saw without making it sound more dramatic than it was. It was roughly the size of an adult man. That is the only normal comparison I can give. I couldn't tell if it was wearing clothing or if what I saw was simply the color of its surface. It looked brownish gray, almost the same shade as wet plaster. Its head was narrow. Its eyes were ordinary enough that I remember them clearly. They weren't glowing or black. They looked human. Its hands did not. Each hand had fingers on both sides. There was a thumb where a thumb should have been, but on the opposite side of each palm, where the little finger should have been. There was another thick thumb bending inward. That was what I noticed first, because I had already seen the marks. The shelf, the alarm, the dents. Those hands had made them. The thing gripped the pantry doorway with both hands. For 1 second, none of us moved. Then its head turned toward me. I heard my grandfather's voice, not generally similar. His voice, the exact rough tone I remembered from mornings at his kitchen table. You busy? My legs nearly gave out. That was what Grandpa used to say after knocking on my door. I had never told anyone at the house how much I remembered that phrase. The thing stepped into the kitchen. I backed away. It moved strangely, but not fast. Its shoulders stayed almost perfectly still while the rest of its body shifted forward. I yelled at Evan to open the front door. He pulled at the deadbolt. It wouldn't move. I ran to him. The thing crossed the kitchen behind us. I could hear its hands touching the walls, not scratching. Pressing, each contact made a small, dull sound. We reached the front door together. I grabbed the deadbolt. It was stuck. I twisted harder. Nothing. Behind us, the dining room floor creaked. I turned. The thing was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. It had stopped. Its head was angled slightly. Listening, then the voice came again. This time it sounded like the man beneath the porch. "You can see me now." I pulled the front door handle with both hands. The deadbolt suddenly released. Evan opened the door. He got outside. I was directly behind him when something grabbed my right forearm. The pressure was incredible. I screamed. I looked down. One of those hands had closed around my arm. There were fingers across the top, and two opposing thumbs underneath. It pulled me backward. My shoulder hit the doorframe. I grabbed the brass railing outside with my left hand. Rain was blowing across the porch. Evan grabbed my jacket. For several seconds, we were both pulling against it. I could feel its nails cutting through my sleeve. I kicked backward without looking. My heel connected with something solid. The grip loosened. I tore free. The sleeve of my jacket ripped from the elbow nearly to the wrist. Evan and I ran into the yard. We didn't stop until we reached the road. We stood beneath a tree across from the driveway in pouring rain while I called my father. He could barely understand me. I kept telling him someone was inside the house. He called the police. My parents reached us before the officer did. Dad wanted to go inside. Mom physically grabbed him and made him wait. A state trooper arrived about 10 minutes later. He searched the entire house with Dad. Nobody was inside. The kitchen side door was still open. The pantry was damaged. One shelf had been torn partly away from the wall. Several jars were broken. The plaster behind the shelves had cracked. The front door deadbolt was bent, and there were marks on the dining room wall. 4 groups of them. They looked like someone had pressed dirty hands against the paint. Each print had 2 opposing thumb shapes. The trooper photographed them. He asked if I had seen an intruder. I said yes. I tried describing him. I left out the part about Grandpa's voice. The trooper searched the basement. Then the attic. Then the yard. He checked windows and doors for forced entry. Nothing. My arm was bleeding in several places. At the emergency room, they cleaned 6 deep scratches and gave me a tetanus shot. I also had dark bruises around my forearm. The bruises formed almost a complete ring. My mother took pictures the next morning. They lasted more than a week. Dad inspected the pantry in daylight. Behind the damaged shelf, the plaster had broken away enough to expose part of the wall cavity. Inside was packed dirt. That made no sense. The wall was above ground level. Dad removed more plaster. The dirt filled a narrow vertical section of the wall between 2 studs. It was damp from the storm. Mixed into it were dead leaves and small stones. He called a contractor he knew. They spent most of the morning figuring out how soil could have gotten inside an interior wall. They never found an answer. Then the contractor discovered another problem. One of the studs had hand marks pressed into it. Not painted on, not scratched. Pressed into the wood deeply enough to leave impressions. The wood was old and dry. There were several sets, some large, some small, all with the same strange arrangement. 4 fingers, a thumb on one side, another thumb on the other. My parents did not tell Evan and me about those marks immediately. I found out years later. We stayed with Grandma for 3 weeks after that night. My father installed new exterior locks, repaired the pantry, replaced sections of damaged plaster, and added motion lights outside. He also sealed the space beneath the side porch with solid wooden panels instead of lattice. My parents considered selling the house. They couldn't afford to. Most of their savings had gone into repairs. So we moved back. For the next 2 years, almost nothing happened. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Silence can be worse after you've spent months waiting for something. I finished high school. I stopped talking about the house. I stopped talking about Grandpa, too. That was one of the worst things the experience did to me. Before the incident, thinking about him hurt because I missed him. Afterward, the memories themselves felt contaminated. The two knocks, his voice, the phrase he used when he came into my room, things that had once made me feel close to him now made my stomach tighten. My grandmother still had an old VH tape from one of my birthdays where Grandpa talked for several minutes. I tried watching it once. As soon as I heard his voice, I turned it off. I hated that. It felt like the house had taken something from me that had nothing to do with it. I moved away for college at 18. Evan stayed home another 4 years. He says he never saw the thing again. Neither did my parents. There were occasional noises. The pantry door opened by itself a few times. My mother once found dirt on the kitchen floor after coming home from vacation. Dad blamed mice, although there were no tracks. Eventually, life moved on. The strange events became a family subject we rarely discussed. Years passed. Grandma died. I got married. Evan moved to Ohio. My parents renovated almost every part of the house, except the pantry. Dad repaired the broken plaster after the incident, but left the original studs and part of the old shelving. Last October, my parents finally decided to redo the kitchen completely. I offered to help. I regretted that almost immediately. On the first Saturday, I arrived around 9 in the morning. The weather was cold but clear. We removed cabinets, disconnected the old sink, and started pulling the pantry shelves. I avoided talking about what had happened there. Dad didn't mention it either. Around noon, he began removing drywall from the pantry's back wall. The original plaster had been covered years earlier. Behind it were the same old studs. Dad stopped working. I knew why. The hand impressions were still there. They had been partially covered by insulation. I saw them for the first time. They looked exactly like the marks I remembered on the alarm and the dining room wall. A hand shape. 4 long fingers. A thumb on each side. There were dozens. Some overlapped. Several were higher than my head. My father stared at them. Then he said something I had never heard before. When I fixed this wall, there were only 7. I asked him what he meant. He pointed. There were 7 prints. I counted the visible ones. There were more than 30. Neither of us spoke for a while. Dad removed another piece of insulation. Something dropped onto the pantry floor. A small object. Metal, it landed with a sharp click. I already knew what it was before I bent down. My grandfather's Timex. Scratched silver case, brown leather strap, crack across the crystal. The watch had been missing for more than 20 years. I picked it up. The hand still read 10:17. My father was staring into the open wall. I asked what was wrong. He didn't answer. He reached for his flashlight. Between 2 studs, behind where the watch had fallen, the dirt inside the wall had been pushed aside. There was a narrow, empty space running downward. Too narrow for a person. At least that is what I thought. Dad shined the flashlight into it. About 3 feet below the pantry floor, something had pressed a fresh handprint into the wet soil. The edges were still slowly collapsing. 4 fingers, a thumb on either side. Then the watch started ticking. I was 19 when this happened, and for years I told the story as if it were just one strange night. That was easier than telling people what happened afterward. The first part sounds almost stupid when I say it out loud. I was walking around my own house with a metal bottle cap in my hand, making it click because I was bored. Something in the dark clicked back. If that had been the end of it, I probably would have convinced myself it was a neighbor, an animal, or some weird effect of sound carrying between houses. It wasn't the end. At the time, I was living with my mother and my younger sister, Claire, in a 2-story house outside Erie, Pennsylvania. The house wasn't old enough to be interesting. It had been built sometime in the late 1970s, with tan siding, brown shutters, and the kind of layout that probably existed in 1,000 neighborhoods. The front door opened into a small hallway. The living room was on the right, the dining room behind it, and the kitchen took up most of the back left side of the first floor. A door in the kitchen opened into the attached garage. Another door beside the refrigerator led down to the basement. The backyard was completely fenced in with a 6-foot cedar fence. On the left side of the house, there was a narrow strip of grass between the wall and the fence, just wide enough for a person to walk through comfortably. That passage connected the driveway to the backyard. There was a wooden gate halfway down it. At the rear of the yard stood an old storage shed my dad had built himself. On the other side of our back fence lived a retired couple named Bill and Sharon Peters. They had a German Shepherd mix called Cooper, who spent a lot of evenings outside during the summer. Dad used to joke that Cooper was our free security system. Dad had been dead for 14 months when the clicking started. He died from complications after a heart attack. He was 52. There was nothing mysterious about his death, and I want to make that clear because people sometimes hear a story like this and immediately decide the dead person must have returned. I don't know what happened in our house. I don't know if it had anything to do with my father. I only know that whatever was there eventually learned things about him that I wish it hadn't. My relationship with Dad had been complicated during the last year of his life. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a food processing plant and was one of those people who could repair almost anything. Cars, furnaces, lawnmowers, appliances, leaking pipes, broken furniture. If something stopped working, Dad took it apart before he even considered buying a replacement. That was why the garage mattered so much. It was his room. Not officially, obviously, but everyone treated it that way. His workbench ran along the back wall beneath a row of pegboards. He had labeled drawers for different screws and electrical connectors. There were shelves of paint, motor oil, old coffee cans full of bolts, extension cords, clamps, saw blades, and half-finished projects he swore he would get back to eventually. After he died, Mom barely touched anything in there. Neither did I. Part of that was grief. Part of it was guilt. 3 nights before Dad had his heart attack, we had gotten into one of the worst arguments we ever had. I had dropped out of community college after 1 semester and was working evenings at a grocery store while I figured out what I wanted to do. Dad was disappointed. He tried not to show it, which somehow made it worse. That night he told me I couldn't spend the next few years waiting for my life to decide itself. I told him he had spent his whole life fixing broken machinery for other people, so maybe he wasn't the best person to lecture me about ambition. The second the words left my mouth, I knew they were cruel. Dad just looked at me. He didn't yell. He said, "That's what you think I did?" I remember shrugging, because I was too proud to apologize. He went into the garage and shut the door. The next morning, we barely spoke. 3 days later, he collapsed at work. He spent 2 nights in the hospital before he died. I visited him once, but he was heavily sedated. I never got to take those words back. After the funeral, I avoided the garage whenever possible. Mom knew why, although we never discussed it directly. The first clicking incident happened near the end of August. I had worked a closing shift and got home around 9:45 at night. It was still warm enough that I had driven with the windows down, but summer was starting to fade. It was getting dark earlier. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sky was completely black except for a faint orange line near the horizon. Claire was staying at a friend's house. Mom had gone to bed early because she worked at a medical office and had to be up before 6. I parked near the garage. Before going inside, I remembered that I had left the backyard hose running slowly into a small maple tree Mom had planted earlier that summer. I had promised her I would shut it off when I got home. I could have gone through the house and out the kitchen door, but the quickest route was around the left side. I grabbed my backpack and started down the narrow passage beside the house. I had been drinking a glass bottle of iced tea during my break at work. I'd thrown the bottle away, but for some reason, I still had the metal cap in my pocket. It was one of those caps that had a raised center. If you pressed the middle with your thumb, the metal flexed inward with a sharp little pop. When you released it, it snapped back. Click, click, I was doing that as I walked. Not in any pattern, just messing with it. The side of our house was darker than the driveway because the garage blocked the porch light. There was one small motion light over the gate, but it had stopped working weeks earlier. I remember hearing insects in the bushes and cars passing several streets away. Everything was completely normal. I opened the side gate. Click, I walked into the backyard. Click, the hose was stretched across the lawn toward the maple tree. I started winding it back toward the faucet. Click, then I stopped playing with the cap because I needed both hands. That was when I heard another click. It came from somewhere near the back fence. I looked up. Nothing was there. The Peters' yard was dark, too. Their back porch light was off. I went back to the hose. Click, I stopped again. That one had definitely not come from my hand. It wasn't exactly the same sound as the bottle cap, but it was very close. A dry, metallic snap. I stood there listening. After maybe 5 seconds, I pressed the cap once. Click, silence. Then, from near the shed, click. I stared toward it. The shed was about 30 feet away. Its door was closed. There were shrubs growing along the fence behind it, so the area around the back corner was almost completely dark. I pressed the cap twice. Click, click. A few seconds passed. Then, click. Click. I remember feeling embarrassed before I felt afraid. My first thought was that somebody was messing with me. One of the neighborhood kids could have been hiding behind the fence. Maybe someone had heard me and was copying the sound with something of their own. I called out. Very funny. Nobody answered. I walked a few steps closer to the house. Then I clicked 3 times. Click, click, click. This time the reply came almost immediately. Click, click, click. But it didn't come from the shed. It came from the narrow passage beside the house. Behind me. I turned around. The gate was still open. Beyond it, I could see part of the driveway and the side of my car. Nobody was there. I suddenly felt very exposed standing in the middle of the yard. I shoved the cap into my pocket and started toward the house. That should have ended it. If someone was playing a joke, I wasn't interested. I walked quickly across the patio toward the kitchen door. Then Cooper started barking. He was in the Peters' yard behind the rear fence. He barked all the time, so that alone wasn't strange. What got my attention was the way he was barking. It was frantic. Deep at first, then higher. He was moving along the fence line because I could hear his paws tearing through the grass. He stopped somewhere behind the shed. Then he began growling. I stood with my hand on our kitchen door. Cooper? I called even though he wasn't our dog. The growling became louder. Then there was a hard impact against the other side of the fence. The board shook. Cooper barked twice more. Something clicked. Not from my pocket. From the other side of the fence. Cooper made a sound I had never heard from a dog before. It was one explosive yelp, loud enough that I jumped. Then, complete silence. No barking. No movement. Nothing. I stayed frozen beside the door. I could hear my own breathing. Then the clicking started again. Click, pause, click, pause, click. It was moving along the fence. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but there is no better way to describe it. The first click came from behind the shed. The next came several feet to the left. Then another. Then another. Whatever was producing the sound seemed to be traveling toward the side of the yard, toward the gate I had just walked through. I unlocked the kitchen door so fast I almost dropped my keys. Before I went inside, I looked back once. Nothing was visible. Then, from directly beside the gate, click, click. I went into the kitchen and locked the door. I checked it twice. I turned on the back porch light. The yard appeared empty. I stood at the window for probably a full minute. No movement, no more clicks. After a while, I started feeling stupid. The dog had probably hurt himself. The clicking could have been anything. A sprinkler, a branch hitting the fence, a neighbor messing around. I took the metal cap out of my pocket and looked at it. For some reason, I didn't want it anymore. I dropped it into the kitchen trash. Then I checked the side door in the garage and made sure it was locked too. I went upstairs. I didn't wake Mom. That decision bothered me later. At around 1:20 in the morning, I woke up. I wasn't sure why. My bedroom was at the front of the second floor, above the garage. The room was dark except for the digital clock on my dresser. I lay there listening. At first, I heard nothing. Then, click. I sat up. The sound had come from below me, from the garage. I waited. Click. A few seconds later, click. Click. My heart started beating hard enough that I could feel it in my neck. I told myself there were hundreds of things in the garage that could make a snapping sound. Metal cooling, tools shifting, the automatic door mechanism, plastic containers changing shape as the temperature dropped. Then the sound changed position. Click. Now it seemed to come from inside the wall near my closet. I got out of bed. I turned on the lamp. Nothing happened. I went into the hallway and listened. Mom's bedroom door was closed at the other end. The house was quiet. I went downstairs. Every light switch I passed went on. Living room, dining room, kitchen. I checked the back door. Locked. Then I looked at the door leading into the garage. I didn't want to open it. I stood there with my hand on the knob for at least 30 seconds. Finally, I told myself I was behaving like a child. I opened the door and turned on the garage light. Nothing. Dad's workbench looked exactly as it always did. Tool chest in the corner. Lawn mower near the garage door. Shelves along the wall. I stepped inside. The temperature was warmer than I expected. The garage had no air conditioning, and the heat from the day was still trapped inside. I checked the side door. Locked. I checked the large garage door. Closed. There was nowhere for anyone to be hiding unless they were behind Dad's workbench or inside one of the storage cabinets. I wasn't going to start searching cabinets at 1 in the morning because of a clicking noise. I turned to leave. Click. I stopped. It came from the workbench. I looked back. Nothing moved. Then I noticed something on the concrete floor. A small round piece of metal. I walked over and picked it up. It was the bottle cap. The same one I had thrown into the kitchen trash. I knew it was the same one because the printing had been scraped off on one edge where I had bent it slightly during work. I stood there staring at it. I actually checked my pocket, even though that made no sense. Then I walked back into the kitchen. The trash can was under the sink. I opened it. There were paper towels, coffee grounds, an empty cereal box, and some other garbage. The cap was obviously gone. I woke my mother. She was annoyed at first, then concerned when she saw how shaken I was. I explained what happened. I expected her to tell me I was overtired. Instead, she came downstairs with me. We checked the doors together. Everything was locked. She looked under the kitchen sink and then at the cap in my hand. "You probably dropped it in the garage earlier," she said. I reminded her I had been clicking it in the backyard and had thrown it away after coming inside. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. Mom took the cap from me and dropped it back into the trash. Then she tied the bag shut. She carried it outside through the front door and put it in the large garbage bin beside the driveway. She came back inside and locked the door. "There," she said. Neither of us laughed. The next morning, Cooper was alive. That was the first thing I checked. I saw Sharon walking him in their backyard while I was making coffee. He had a white bandage around his right front leg. I went outside and asked what happened. She said something had frightened him during the night. She and Bill had heard him going crazy at the back fence. Then he yelped. When Bill went outside, Cooper was hiding under their porch. He had 2 cuts on his leg. Sharon assumed he had caught himself on the fence. She said the strange part was that he refused to go near the back corner of the yard. I looked toward the fence. Cooper was watching the same spot. His ears were pulled back. I didn't tell Sharon what I had heard. Later that afternoon, I checked our side yard. There were fresh marks on the inside of the wooden gate. 3 narrow scratches. They were about chest height. At first, I thought they were just old damage I had never noticed. Then, I saw the wood chips lying on the grass. The exposed wood was pale and fresh. I showed Mom. She ran her fingers over them. "Could have been a raccoon," she said. I asked how a raccoon scratched 3 straight lines 5 feet above the ground. She didn't answer. The next few days were quiet. I tried to forget about it. That worked until Thursday night. Claire was home by then. She was 16 and thought the entire story was funny. She kept making clicking sounds with her tongue whenever she passed me. Mom told her to stop. Claire kept doing it anyway. At dinner, she pressed the button on a retractable pen 3 times and looked at me. Click, click, click. I told her she was hilarious. She grinned. Then, something clicked 3 times from the basement. Claire stopped smiling. Mom looked toward the basement door. Nobody spoke. After several seconds, I stood up. Mom told me to sit down. I asked if she had put laundry in the dryer. She said no. The basement was unfinished except for a small carpeted room Dad had used as an office. The furnace and water heater were at the bottom of the stairs. The washer and dryer were farther back along the left wall. Mom made me take a flashlight, even though the ceiling lights worked. Claire stayed in the kitchen. I opened the basement door. Nothing unusual. I went down slowly. The air smelled like detergent and concrete. The furnace wasn't running. The dryer was off. I checked behind it anyway. Nothing. Then I heard a click from Dad's old office. The door was closed. That room had become a storage area after he died. I walked toward it. Click. I stopped in front of the door. "Mom?" I called. She answered from upstairs. I opened the office. Boxes. An old desk. Christmas decorations. A filing cabinet. Nothing else. I stepped inside. Something was lying on Dad's desk. A retractable ballpoint pen. Black plastic. The same kind he always bought in packs of 12. I stared at it for a moment. Then I told myself it meant nothing. There were probably dozens of his old pens around the house. I picked it up. The button was already pressed down. I clicked it once to retract the tip. Click. From inside the wall behind the desk came another click. I dropped the pen. I backed out of the room. Then the wall clicked twice. I ran upstairs. Mom shut the basement door. Claire stopped making jokes after that. We talked about reasonable explanations. Mice, pipes, the house settling. A problem with the furnace. Mom even called an HVAC company because she thought one of the ducts might be expanding and contracting. A technician checked the system. Everything was working normally. He did find one loose duct near the basement ceiling and secured it. For 3 nights, we heard nothing. Then Mom found Dad's pen on her nightstand. That scared her more than she admitted. She had taken the pen from the basement and put it into a kitchen drawer after I told her what happened. Claire could have moved it. I could have moved it. Mom could have forgotten. There were explanations. We kept using them. What else were we supposed to do? Things got worse slowly. A click would come from the hallway when nobody was there, another from inside the garage. Sometimes it happened during the day. Sometimes several nights passed without anything. The sound never came continuously. That was what made it difficult. If something had been rattling or knocking for hours, we could have found the source. This seemed deliberate. 1 or 2 clicks. Then, silence. It started responding again in September. Claire tested it first. I was in the kitchen with her one afternoon when she picked up a jar lid. It had a flexible safety button in the center. She pressed it once. Click. Nothing happened. She pressed it twice. Click, click, Mom heard and told her not to encourage it. That sentence made all 3 of us quiet. Encourage what? I asked. Mom looked embarrassed. I don't know. Claire waited until Mom left the room. Then she pressed the lid 3 times. We listened. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then, 3 clicks answered from the garage. Claire dropped the jar. Glass broke across the floor. After that, we stopped making the sound on purpose. The physical evidence continued. One morning, Mom found Dad's workbench drawers open. Not all of them. 7, every other drawer had been pulled out about 2 inches. The garage had been locked overnight. Nothing was missing. A week later, there were new scratches on the inside of the side gate. Then, more appeared on one of the wooden fence panels behind the shed, all at roughly the same height. 3 straight cuts. Below those scratches were small, round dents in the wood, each about the size of a quarter. They looked as if someone had pressed a metal bottle cap into the fence hard enough to crush the grain. Bill came over to look at them. He worked construction before retiring. He said he had no idea what caused them. Cooper wouldn't come into our yard while Bill was there. He stood at the open gate with his legs stiff and refused to cross. October came. The nights got colder. The clicking moved indoors more often. One evening, I was watching television with Mom when something clicked from the dining room, then from the kitchen, then from the garage. 3 separate places, each one closer to Dad's workbench. Mom muted the television. We sat there listening. Nothing else happened. I said we should clean out the garage. Mom immediately said no. It was the first time we had openly argued about Dad's things since he died. I told her leaving everything untouched wasn't healthy. She said I had barely stepped into the garage for a year, so I didn't get to lecture her about letting go. That hit harder than I expected. I said something defensive. She started crying. Then I did too. Claire went upstairs because she didn't know what to do. Mom and I ended up sitting at the kitchen table. She told me Dad had talked about me while he was in the hospital. I didn't know that. I asked what he said. Mom hesitated. He was worried you thought he was disappointed in you. I couldn't speak. She continued. He wasn't. He was scared you were giving up because you were afraid to fail. I stared at the table. I asked if he had mentioned our argument. Mom nodded. What did he say? She wiped her eyes. He said you didn't mean it. That should have helped. Instead, I felt worse. For 14 months, I had carried this idea that Dad had died, believing I thought his life was pathetic. Now I learned he had understood me better than I understood myself. I went into the garage that night. Mom came with me. We didn't clean anything. We just stood there. I looked at his tools. His old jacket still hung from a hook beside the side door. There was a faded coffee mug on the upper shelf. I remembered him standing at the bench on Sunday mornings with the radio playing. For the first time since his death, I let myself remember the good things without immediately returning to the argument. I picked up one of his screwdrivers. The handle was worn smooth where his hand had held it for years. Behind me, click. Mom heard it too. It came from inside Dad's metal tool chest. I put the screwdriver down. Neither of us opened the chest. We left the garage and locked the door to the kitchen. That was the point when the clicking became personal. 2 nights later, I heard Dad's cough. My bedroom was above the garage. It was around midnight. I was almost asleep when I heard someone cough beneath me. A dry, short cough. Dad used to make exactly that sound when sawdust or dust got into his throat while he worked. I sat up. There was another cough. Then a click. I got out of bed and went into the hallway. Mom's bedroom door opened. She looked at me. You heard that? I nodded. We did not go downstairs. The next morning, Dad's old work jacket was lying in the kitchen. It had been hanging in the garage the night before. The door between the kitchen and garage was still locked. Mom had the key in her bedroom. The jacket smelled like cold dirt. There was mud on one sleeve. Not dried mud. Fresh, dark soil. Mom put the jacket in a plastic storage bin and moved it to her closet. She did not put it back in the garage. That same week, Sharon knocked on our door. She asked if we had seen anyone walking through the yards at night. I asked why. She said Cooper had started barking at the rear fence again. Bill had installed a motion light. Twice it had turned on around 3 in the morning. Both times, Cooper had refused to leave the porch. Bill had checked outside and found nothing. Then, Sharon said something that made me feel cold. There's this clicking noise. Mom looked at me. Sharon noticed. You've heard it? Mom asked what it sounded like. Sharon thought for a moment. Like one of those little metal lids. Nobody told her about the bottle cap. After she left, Mom finally said we should call the police if we heard anything outside again. She still wasn't talking about ghosts. Neither was I. Our theory became that somebody was moving through the yards. Maybe a disturbed person. Maybe someone who had figured out the clicking frightened us. That was honestly worse in some ways, because a real person could break into the house. We added security cameras. One pointed down the driveway. One covered the backyard. One covered the narrow side passage and gate. For 11 nights, nothing happened. On the 12th, at 2:13 in the morning, the side camera detected motion. We all watched the footage the next morning. The video showed the empty passage beside the house. The gate was closed. Nothing moved. About 7 seconds into the recording, the audio picked up a click. Then another. The camera shook. Not much. Just enough to blur the image for half a second. A third click followed. Then, 3 new scratches appeared on the gate. We watched the recording repeatedly. There was no hand, no tool, no person. One frame showed smooth wood. A few frames later, the scratches were there. Mom called the police. An officer came and watched the footage. He didn't have an explanation. He suggested replacing the camera because video compression could create strange effects. He photographed the gate. He checked the yard. He found no footprints. The ground was dry, so that didn't mean much. 2 weeks passed. Then came the confrontation. It was a Saturday night in early November. Claire was at a school event. Mom had gone to dinner with her sister. I was home alone. Rain had started around 7 and became heavier as the evening went on. Around 10, the power flickered. It didn't go out completely. The lights dimmed, returned, then dimmed again. I was in the living room. A few minutes later, I heard something fall in the garage. I ignored it. Then, another object hit the floor. I texted Mom and told her something was happening. She said she was leaving my aunt's house. I considered going outside and waiting in my car. Then I heard Dad's cough from the garage. I wish I could say I immediately recognized that whatever was making these noises wasn't my father. Intellectually, I knew that. Emotionally, it wasn't so simple. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the garage door. Another cough. Then a metallic click. I put my hand on the knob. I didn't open it. Then I heard something else. My father's voice, very quiet. Could use a hand. I stopped breathing for a second. Dad had said that constantly when he worked in the garage, not as some meaningful family phrase, just a normal thing. If he needed me to hold a board or pass him a wrench, he would call through the kitchen door. Could use a hand. I hadn't thought about those words in years, my eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. I hated myself for it. I knew it wasn't him. I knew. But some part of me still wanted to open that door. Then the voice said it again. Could use a hand. The second time was wrong. The timing was wrong. There was no natural rhythm. Each word was separated by the same short pause. Could use a hand like someone had taken 4 pieces of speech and arranged them. I backed away. The garage doorknob turned. The door was locked. The knob rotated again. Slowly, then stopped. Click. A second click came from behind me. I turned. The basement door was open. I had not opened it. The basement stairs disappeared into darkness. The light switch was beside the doorway. I reached for it. Before I touched it, something clicked from below. Then, Dad's voice came from the basement. Could use a hand. I ran toward the front door. The living room lights went out. The kitchen stayed on. I grabbed the front deadbolt. Behind me, the door to the garage slammed open. Not unlocked. Opened, the wood around the latch split. I heard it hit the wall. I turned. For the first time, I saw what had been making the sound. It stood in the kitchen doorway. The easiest description is that it had the general size of a tall man, but I knew immediately that it wasn't a person. It wasn't transparent. It wasn't black. It wasn't glowing. The kitchen light hit it normally. That almost made it worse. Its body looked solid. Its skin had a dull gray-brown color, close to wet cardboard. Its arms seemed slightly too long, but not enough that I would have noticed from a distance. Its face had features. A nose, eyes, a mouth. But everything sat a little too low. The forehead was much larger than it should have been, and the eyes were closer to the cheeks than normal. It looked less like a distorted face and more like someone had assembled a normal face in the wrong position. That wasn't the part I remember most clearly. Its hands were open. In the center of each palm was a round patch of hard-looking skin about the width of a bottle cap. The patches were lighter than the rest of its body, gray with a faint metallic shine. As I watched, the center of its right palm bent inward. Click, then it snapped back. That was the sound. The same dry metallic click I had heard from the yard. The thing tilted its head. Its left palm snapped. Click. I couldn't move. Then it coughed like my father, not perfectly anymore. Now that I could see it, I heard the flaws. The sound was too clean. No breath before it, no breath after. Just the cough. Then it said, "Could use a hand." I reached for the front door. It moved, fast, not running. It dropped both hands to the kitchen floor and pulled itself forward with its arms. Its legs followed awkwardly behind it. The palms struck the tile. Click, click, click. I opened the front door. Something caught the back of my sweatshirt. I was yanked backward hard enough that my throat hit the collar. I grabbed the door frame. The fabric tightened around my neck. I screamed. I kicked behind me. My heel hit an arm. The grip loosened for half a second. I twisted out of the sweatshirt. I fell onto the front porch, wearing only a t-shirt. Behind me, the thing hit the inside of the door. I rolled onto my back. One arm came through the opening. Its hand slapped flat against the porch boards, the round patch in the palm depressed. Click, its fingers closed around my ankle. The grip was extremely strong. I kicked with my other foot. It pulled me toward the doorway. My jeans tore at the knee as I scraped across the porch. I grabbed the metal railing. The rain made everything slippery. I remember yelling for help, even though I knew the nearest neighbors probably couldn't hear me over the weather. The thing pulled again. Pain shot through my ankle. Then headlights turned into our driveway. Mom, the hand released me instantly. I heard something moving through the house. Not footsteps, a rapid series of impacts. Then the kitchen door slammed. Mom jumped out of her car before she had fully parked. She saw me on the porch and started screaming. I told her not to go inside. She called 911. We waited in her car with the doors locked. I was shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone. Police arrived within minutes. 2 officers entered the house. They searched every room. Then the basement. Then the garage. Nobody was there. The back kitchen door was locked from the inside. The garage side door was also locked. The side gate was closed. The house had no broken windows. But there was physical damage everywhere. The door frame between the kitchen and garage had split where the locked door had opened. My sweatshirt was on the kitchen floor. The back of it had been torn almost completely across. There were 5 long creases crushed into the fabric where something had grabbed it. My ankle was bruised. 3 fingers had broken the skin above my sock. Those marks were photographed at the hospital. The strangest evidence was on the front porch. There were muddy handprints on the boards, not normal handprints. The fingers looked human. 5 fingers, normal spacing. But in the center of each palm was a perfect circular depression. The police photographed those too. The rain washed away the weaker prints, but 4 remained under the covered section of the porch until the next morning. 1 officer took measurements. Mom took pictures. The marks were still visible after the mud dried. The prints led from the front doorway to where I had been dragged. There were no footprints beside them, only hands. The police treated it as an attempted break-in. I don't blame them. What else could they write? They searched the yard the next morning. The rain had softened the soil. Behind the shed, they found a disturbed area near the fence. There were hand impressions there, too. No shoe prints. The marks continued along the fence toward the side gate, then stopped. Bill and Sharon let the officers inspect their yard. Cooper had been kept inside during the storm. He refused to come outside while the police were there. For the next week, my mother Claire and I stayed at my aunt's house. Mom wanted to sell. Claire wanted to move immediately. I wanted the same thing. But before we could make any decision, Mom needed paperwork and clothes from the house. She refused to go alone. So the following Saturday, we returned during daylight. My uncle came with us. Nothing happened. The house looked normal. The broken garage doorway had been temporarily secured. The dried marks on the porch were still visible. My uncle stared at them for several minutes. He didn't have an explanation either. Mom collected clothes. Claire packed some school things. I stayed downstairs. I told myself I was only there to help. Then I found myself standing outside the garage. The door frame was cracked. Yellow police tape had been removed, but the splintered wood was still there. For the first time since Dad died, the garage didn't feel preserved. Things had been knocked over during the confrontation. A container of screws had spilled. Several tools were on the floor. One of Dad's pegboards hung crooked. His workbench was covered in dust and debris. Looking at it made me angry. Not scared. Angry. I had spent more than a year protecting that room because I thought changing it would mean losing him. Then, something had come into our house and used his voice because it knew I couldn't let him go. I don't know how it knew. Maybe that assumption is wrong. But that is how it felt. I started cleaning. My uncle asked if I wanted help. I told him no. I picked up tools, sorted screws, threw away broken containers. For almost an hour, nothing strange happened. Then I reached the bottom drawer of Dad's workbench. That drawer had always been locked. Dad kept personal things in there. Tax papers, old photographs. The title to a motorcycle he had sold years before. Mom had never found the key after he died. We had simply left it closed. Now the drawer was open about an inch. I called Mom. She came into the garage. She stared at it. "Did you open that?" I said no. She called my uncle. He pulled the drawer the rest of the way out. Inside were papers, photographs, 2 old pocket knives, and a small envelope with my name written on it. My handwriting shook as soon as I saw it. It was Dad's writing. Mom started crying. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside was a birthday card. My 20th birthday was still 3 months away when Dad died. Apparently, he had bought the card early. That was like him. There was no long message. Just, "You'll figure it out. Give yourself time." Love, Dad. I sat on the garage floor. I cried harder than I had at his funeral. Mom sat beside me. For once, the grief felt like grief. Not fear, not guilt, just missing him. I still have that card. Finding it should have been the last thing connected to the house. It wasn't. At the bottom of the locked drawer, under the photographs, was a small metal object. My mother saw it first. She reached in and picked it up. It was the iced tea bottle cap, the one I had been clicking in the backyard. The same one Mom had sealed inside a garbage bag and carried to the outside trash bin almost 3 months earlier. The bent edge was still there. I took it from her. Nobody spoke. I pressed the center gently with my thumb. It snapped inward. Click. My uncle told me to stop. I released it. Click. Nothing happened. I almost laughed. Then I noticed the back wall of the drawer. There were scratches in the wood. 3 long cuts. Beside them were several round dents, the same size as the hard patches I had seen in its palms. My uncle pulled the entire drawer out of the workbench. Behind it was a dark gap between the cabinet and the garage wall. He shined his phone light into it. The drywall behind the workbench had been broken inward, not a large hole, maybe 6 inches across. There was insulation sticking through it. Mom said the wall had been intact before. My uncle crouched and looked closer. He reached toward the hole. I grabbed his shoulder and told him not to. He backed away. We stood there, staring. From the other side of the wall came my father's cough. Then the bottle cap clicked in my hand. The second click came from inside the wall. I was 26 when I spent the worst Thanksgiving of my life at my girlfriend's mother's house outside Cleveland, Ohio for years. Whenever I told anyone the story, I stopped at the part about finding her uncle downstairs. That part was disturbing enough on its own, and more importantly, people believed it. A missing relative hiding in a family home because he had nowhere else to go was ugly, sad, and completely possible. What happened after I found him was harder to talk about. My girlfriend at the time was named Rachel. We had been together a little over 2 years. She was funny, impulsive, easily offended, incredibly loyal, and sometimes exhausting. Her mother, Linda, had been living alone since her husband died 18 months earlier. Her husband's name was Paul. He had suffered a stroke in the kitchen one morning and died at the hospital the following day. Afterward, Linda became the kind of person who kept the television on even when she wasn't watching it. She would leave a radio playing in the bedroom while she cooked downstairs. If Rachel and I visited, she always found reasons to make us stay another hour. Nobody called her lonely to her face. She was. The house made it worse. It was a large 1950s colonial in Parma, built for a family of 5, but occupied by one woman in her late 50s. The front door opened into a narrow foyer with the living room on the right and a dining room behind it. The kitchen stretched across the rear of the first floor. A short hallway beside the refrigerator led to a half bathroom and the door down to the lower level. The staircase beneath that door was steep. At the bottom, the concrete floor opened into a wide, unfinished area. The washer and dryer stood against the left wall. Straight ahead was a utility sink, an old refrigerator, and several metal storage shelves. The heating equipment occupied the right side, partly hidden behind a rough wooden partition Paul had built years earlier. Behind that partition was the strangest section. A narrow service space ran between the furnace and the foundation wall. It was barely wide enough for a thin adult to stand sideways. Beyond it, under the rear addition, there was a low crawl space accessible through a square opening covered by a plywood panel. Linda never used that part. Paul had stored old paint cans there. Rachel hated going near it. She said centipedes came through the opening in summer. The garage was attached to the kitchen on the opposite side of the house. A back door beside the sink opened onto a covered patio and a small fenced yard. The neighborhood was quiet. Most of the houses had belonged to the same families for decades. People noticed unfamiliar cars. That was why the police showed up that night. Dinner had already been depressing before the doorbell rang. Linda wasn't much of a cook, and Paul had apparently handled most holiday meals when he was alive. Rachel and I had offered to bring food, but the plan fell apart because I worked until noon and she had forgotten to order half the things she promised. We ended up eating grocery store turkey slices, boxed stuffing, canned cranberry sauce, microwaved vegetables, and a pumpkin pie that was still half frozen in the middle. Nobody cared. The problem wasn't the food. It was the empty chair. Paul used to sit at the end of the dining table nearest the kitchen. Linda had removed that chair after he died, but the open space remained. At several points during dinner, she looked toward it without realizing she was doing it. I understood that kind of behavior. My older brother, Eric, had died 3 years earlier. His death was different. He overdosed alone in his apartment. He was 31. I was 23. Eric had struggled with painkillers after a construction injury, then moved to heroin when prescriptions became harder to get. Our family spent years trying to help him. Rehab, loans, counseling, promises, arguments, emergency rooms, missing money. Apologies, more promises. The last time he called me, I didn't answer. I knew exactly why he was calling. He had asked for money twice that week. I had finally told him I was done helping unless he agreed to treatment. When his name appeared on my phone that Friday night, I watched it ring. He left no voicemail. He died sometime the next morning. I carried that unanswered call like a stone inside me. Rationally, I knew answering probably would not have saved him. Emotion does not care about probability. That history became important later because Rachel's uncle had problems of his own. His name was Dennis. He was Linda's younger brother. He had been in and out of treatment for years because of methamphetamine and alcohol. Sometimes he disappeared for months. Then he would call Linda, apologize, borrow money, sleep on her couch for a week, and vanish again. I had met him twice. The first time, he was sober and surprisingly charming. The second time, he looked exhausted and kept scratching his arms. Linda hadn't heard from him in almost 2 months. Rachel assumed he was somewhere in Kentucky with a woman he had been seeing. Nobody knew. During dinner, his name never came up. We were discussing whether there was enough pie left to bother saving when the doorbell rang. Linda frowned. It was almost 8. She wasn't expecting anyone. I got up with her because there had been package thefts in the neighborhood, and she had become nervous about unexpected visitors. 2 uniformed officers were standing on the porch. One was a woman around 40. The other looked younger than me. They apologized for interrupting the holiday. Then the older officer asked whether Linda knew anything about a dark blue Chevrolet van parked around the corner on Ridgewood Avenue. Linda said no. The officer asked whether anyone in the family owned one. Again, no. Apparently, it had been sitting in the same place for several days. Neighbors had complained because it was partly blocking a hydrant. The police had started asking nearby residents if they knew who it belonged to. One neighbor mentioned seeing the same vehicle parked directly in front of Linda's house on several occasions during the previous month. That changed her expression. She asked what kind of van. The officer repeated the description. Older model. Dark blue. Rust along the bottom edge. One rear window covered with cardboard. Linda said she had never noticed it. Rachel came into the foyer behind us. When she heard the description, she looked at me. I knew immediately that it meant something to her. The officer asked whether we recognized it. Rachel shook her head. Too quickly. The police thanked us and said they would probably tow it if nobody claimed it. They left. Linda waited until the patrol car had pulled away. Then she closed the front door. She stood with her hand on the deadbolt for several seconds. Rachel asked, "What?" Her mother turned around. Dennis had a blue van. Nobody said anything. Linda looked toward the kitchen. Her face drained. Oh, God. Rachel asked what was wrong. Linda ignored her and stared at me. "You need to check downstairs." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently, several things had been bothering her during the previous 2 weeks. Food had gone missing. Not enough to make her think someone was stealing. A loaf of bread disappeared faster than expected. Half a package of sliced cheese vanished. 2 cans of soup were gone from a pantry shelf. She had blamed herself. Then she started noticing the lower door unlocked in the mornings. She always kept it secured because the cellar felt cold and she didn't like drafts coming up the stairwell. Twice she thought she had closed it before bed and found it slightly open the next day. The old refrigerator below had also been plugged in. Linda swore she had disconnected it months earlier because she didn't use it. She had assumed Paul might have left some timer or electrical setting she didn't understand. The look Rachel gave her mother was almost anger. "You didn't tell me any of this?" I thought I was forgetting things. The 3 of us stood in the kitchen. Nobody wanted to touch the stairway door. Finally, Linda said, "If Dennis is down there, I'm going to kill him." That sounded more normal. A troubled relative sneaking into an unused part of the house was unpleasant, but at least it made sense. I grabbed the large flashlight Linda kept in the junk drawer. Rachel said she was coming. Her mother told her to stay upstairs. I volunteered because I was the only adult man present, and apparently we were still operating under rules from 1952. I wish I had refused. The lower stairwell smelled stronger than I remembered. Not rotten, more like damp fabric, cigarette smoke, and old concrete. I turned on the ceiling light. Only one bulb came on. The fixture near the laundry machines remained dark. Linda followed me to the third step. I told her to wait. She ignored me. At the bottom, the space looked normal at first. Laundry baskets, shelves, Christmas decorations, a folded card table leaning against the wall. Then my flashlight passed over the area beyond the washer. Someone had made a sleeping place. An old twin mattress lay directly on the concrete. 2 dirty blankets covered it. A pillow had been stuffed into a gray sweatshirt instead of a pillowcase. Beside the mattress sat several empty water bottles and a plastic grocery bag full of food wrappers. An orange extension cord ran across the floor. It disappeared behind the wooden partition near the heating unit. Another cable went upward to a bare bulb that had been hung from a ceiling joist. A small television sat on an overturned milk crate. It wasn't an old television either. It was a cheap modern flat screen, maybe 20 inches wide. Linda stared at everything. Oh my God. Her voice cracked. He's been living down here. She started calling Dennis's name. I told her not to. That might sound strange, but something about the room felt wrong. Maybe it was the hidden bed. Maybe it was the thought of someone moving through the house while Linda slept upstairs. There were enough signs to show the person had been there for more than a night. Pizza boxes, dirty socks, a stack of paper plates, an ashtray made from a soda can, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, a bottle of mouthwash. Whoever had stayed there had settled in. Linda asked again whether I saw him. I said no. She moved toward the mattress. I stopped her. Go get Rachel. She didn't argue. The second she turned toward the stairs, I heard something behind the furnace. A tiny movement. Fabric brushing metal. I raised the flashlight. The wooden partition ended about 2 feet from the foundation wall, leaving a narrow opening into the service gap. I walked closer. Every part of me said to wait for the police. I didn't. I think I was still trying to keep the situation normal. A homeless family member. A drug problem. Something sad rather than frightening. I stepped around the partition. At first I saw only the heating unit. Then my light reached the space behind it. Dennis was standing there. He was almost naked. Boxer shorts. No shirt. No shoes. He had lost a shocking amount of weight since I last saw him. His ribs showed clearly. His beard had grown unevenly. There were dark circles under his eyes. A bruise covered one side of his chest. He was pressed sideways between the metal casing and the concrete wall. His finger was against his lips. He stared at me. Not embarrassed, not angry that I had found him. Terrified, he slowly shook his head. I whispered, "Dennis?" His eyes widened. He pressed his finger harder against his mouth. Then he pointed downward. I followed the gesture. The plywood covering the crawl space entrance was slightly open, maybe 3 inches. The darkness beyond it looked absolute. Dennis leaned toward me. His voice was barely audible. "Don't let it know you saw me." I assumed he was high. That should have been my first and only conclusion. Instead, something about the way he said it made me lower my own voice. "What are you talking about?" He shook his head. From upstairs, Linda yelled, "Did you find anything?" Dennis grabbed my wrist. His hand was ice cold. "Please." That one word hit me harder than it should have. For half a second, I wasn't looking at Rachel's uncle. I was thinking about Eric. The missed calls. The nights my brother slept in places he wouldn't tell us about. The final months when every conversation became about money or treatment. I knew exactly what everyone upstairs would want to do. Police, hospital, possibly jail. Some part of me decided I could handle it more gently. That was arrogance disguised as compassion. I stepped away from Dennis. Linda called again. I went back toward the stairs. She was halfway down. Well, I lied. Nobody's here. She stared past me. What about all this? I think someone was staying here. They're gone now. Linda swore under her breath. Rachel appeared behind her. I looked at Rachel and gave the smallest shake of my head. She knew me well enough to understand that I was hiding something. Linda said she was calling the police back. I told her we should check the house first. That bought me maybe 10 minutes. We searched the first floor. Windows locked. Back door secure. Garage empty. Nothing missing. By the time we finished, Linda had talked herself out of calling anyone. She didn't want officers searching through the entire home on a holiday. She also didn't want to believe her brother had been sneaking around. Rachel kept watching me. After dinner, while Linda washed dishes, she pulled me into the living room. You saw him. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Her face tightened. Where? I told her. She whispered something I won't repeat. Why didn't you tell Mom? He begged me not to. He's using again. Probably. Probably? I described how he looked. Rachel wanted to go downstairs immediately. I stopped her. I said I would talk to him alone first. She asked why I thought that was my responsibility. I didn't have a good answer. I told her about Eric. She already knew the history. She understood what I wasn't saying. If I could get Dennis into treatment without humiliating him in front of his sister, maybe I could prove something to myself. That I had learned. That I could help someone this time. Rachel stared at me for a long moment. Finally, she said, "He isn't your brother." I knew that. I just didn't feel it yet. Linda went to bed around 11. Rachel and I stayed downstairs. The holiday had ended without anybody touching the pie again. Around midnight, Rachel sat in the living room while I returned to the cellar. The mattress was empty. Dennis was gone from the narrow gap. I whispered his name. No answer. The television had been switched off. I checked behind the furnace. Nothing. The plywood panel was closed now. I knew it had been open earlier. I crouched beside it. There was no handle, only a small finger hole near the edge. I pulled. The panel moved maybe an inch and stopped. Something blocked it from the other side. I released it. A smell came through the gap. Cold dirt. Wet wood. Something metallic. I backed away. A voice came from behind me. Don't. I turned so fast I almost dropped the flashlight. Dennis stood near the laundry machines. He had put on jeans and a brown coat. I hadn't heard him approach. I whispered, "Where were you?" He pointed toward the utility sink. There was an old door beside it that led to a tiny cold storage room under the back porch. I hadn't even known the door opened. Dennis had been inside. I told him he needed to leave. He nodded immediately. That surprised me. Then he said, "Not through the backyard. Fine front door." He shook his head. "Garage," I asked why. He stared toward the plywood panel. "Because it knows the other doors." I had dealt with people high on stimulants before because of Eric. Paranoia can sound incredibly convincing when the person believes it completely. I reminded myself of that. I asked about the van. Dennis admitted it was his. He had parked around the corner because Linda had told him months earlier not to come back if he was using. He had found a way into the house through a small garage window that didn't latch properly. He knew Linda's routine. When she went shopping or visited friends, he came upstairs for food. He had been sleeping below for about 9 days. I asked why he was hiding behind the furnace when I found him. His face changed. "Because I heard you come down." "That's not what you said." He looked at the floor. I asked what he meant about something knowing I had seen him. Dennis rubbed both hands over his face. Then he said, "Forget it." I told him I would drive him somewhere. Hospital, shelter, friend, anywhere. He refused the hospital. I asked if he had drugs on him. "No." "Are you high right now?" No, I didn't believe him. Then he did something unexpected. He held out both hands. They were shaking. Not the quick tremor I associated with stimulants. His whole forearms were tense. There were marks around his wrists, 4 circular bruises on each side, each one about the size of a dime. I asked who had done that. Dennis pulled his sleeves down. "Nobody," I pressed. He became irritated. Finally, he said there was someone here before me. I thought he meant another squatter. "Where?" He pointed toward the crawl space. I looked at the plywood. Dennis said he discovered the mattress already in place. Some of the food wrappers were his. The television wasn't. Neither were the dirty blankets. That information changed the situation. I asked why he stayed. "Because I had nowhere else." "Who was down there?" "I don't know." "Did you see them?" He looked toward the wall. "Not right." I asked what that meant. He refused to explain. Then a quiet sound came from behind the plywood. A soft pressure against wood. The panel moved outward, less than half an inch. Dennis took one step backward. Another slow push followed. I told myself there could be an animal inside. Raccoon, possum, something trapped under the addition. I reached for the board. Dennis grabbed my arm. "Don't open it." I told him to let go. He did. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the panel settled flat again. I decided that was enough. I told Dennis to get his things. He packed surprisingly little. A backpack, phone charger, 2 shirts, a toothbrush. He left the blankets and television. While he packed, I noticed marks on the concrete beside the mattress. Small dark circles. They formed a broken line toward the wooden partition. At first, I thought they were stains from cans. Then I crouched. Each spot had a faint, oily ring around the edge, roughly nickel-sized. There were 7 or 8. I touched one. It felt greasy. Dennis saw what I was doing. "Stop touching stuff." His voice was sharp. I wiped my finger on my jeans. He grabbed his backpack. We went upstairs. Rachel was waiting in the kitchen. When she saw her uncle, she covered her mouth. Dennis looked embarrassed. She hugged him anyway. He stayed stiff. For a second, I thought he might cry. Then, Linda's bedroom floor creaked above us. We moved quickly into the garage. Dennis told Rachel not to wake her mother. She asked where he had been. He said he would explain later. We drove him to a 24-hour motel near the interstate. I paid for 2 nights. Before he got out of the car, he leaned forward between the front seats. "Don't let her sleep downstairs." Rachel almost laughed because her mother's bedroom was upstairs. Dennis didn't. He looked at me. "If you hear something moving around the furnace, stay out of there." I told him we had already heard the panel. He stared. "You opened it?" No. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Then he got out. On the drive back, Rachel said he was psychotic. I agreed, but neither of us slept well. The next morning, Linda discovered the garage window. Dennis had been right. One corner of the old frame could be pushed inward because the latch was broken. There were muddy streaks beneath it. Linda was furious. Rachel finally told her the truth. Not everything. She said Dennis had been downstairs and that we had taken him to a motel. Linda cried. Then she got angry at me for lying. She had every right. After about 20 minutes, she called her brother. No answer. She called again. Nothing. The motel said he had checked out early. The blue van was gone from Ridgewood Avenue. For the next few days, we assumed the problem had left with him. Linda threw away the mattress. She put the blankets into heavy garbage bags. I helped remove the television. When I picked it up, I noticed the power cord ended in bare copper. It had no plug. The extension cable running toward it had been cut too. There was no way it had been operating. I asked Linda whether she had seen it turned on. She said no. Neither had I. I remembered assuming it was connected because the cord lay near the extension lead. That was all. We carried it to the curb. The next strange event happened 3 nights later. Rachel called me shortly after 1 in the morning. She was crying. Her mother had heard something downstairs. I lived about 15 minutes away. I told them not to investigate. Rachel said they were both upstairs with the bedroom door locked. I drove over. Every light in the house was on. Linda opened the front door before I reached the porch. The moment I entered, I smelled something unusual. Damp insulation. The same cold metallic odor I had noticed near the crawl space. Linda said it had started in the kitchen. Then the heating system shut off. A few minutes later, she heard something heavy shift below. Not repetitive, just one movement, like furniture being dragged a short distance. We called the police. I didn't want to make the same mistake again. 2 officers arrived. They searched the cellar. Nobody was there. The plywood panel remained closed. One officer opened it. I stood at the bottom of the stairs while he crouched with his flashlight. Beyond the opening was a dirt-floored space about 3 feet high. Pipes ran overhead. Fiberglass insulation hung between joists. The officer crawled several feet inside. He found nothing. No person, no animal, no alternate entrance. The foundation was solid. He did find food wrappers farther back. Linda assumed Dennis had left them. I wasn't sure. The wrappers were covered in dust. Some looked much older. Police checked the garage window and recommended replacing it immediately. Before leaving, one officer pointed out scratches on the plywood panel. They were on the inside surface, long, shallow grooves. Nothing dramatic. Could have been from tools. The next morning, Linda called a contractor. He fixed the garage window and inspected the crawl space for animals. No nests, no droppings, no obvious openings. He did notice several strange stains on a floor joist, small circles with dark edges, the same kind I had seen near the mattress. He thought they might be old adhesive marks. Linda had him clean them. That should have ended it. Instead, the house became uncomfortable in ways that were difficult to explain. Objects began turning up where they didn't belong. Nothing dramatic. A coffee cup from the kitchen appeared beside the washing machine. A bath towel was found on the basement steps. One of Linda's slippers disappeared for 2 days and turned up behind the utility sink. Rachel blamed her mother's memory. Linda blamed stress. I blamed Dennis. I thought maybe he had found another way inside. We changed the locks. I installed a camera facing the cellar door. A second one covered the back patio. Another pointed toward the garage. Nothing useful appeared. Still, each time we visited, something felt slightly off. The air downstairs seemed heavier than the rest of the house. The heating system worked normally, yet the section near the wooden partition stayed several degrees colder. The contractor measured it. He thought outside air was entering through the foundation. He couldn't find where. Then Linda started hearing footsteps. She described them as bare feet on concrete. 3 or 4 steps, always at night, never long enough to record after she grabbed her phone. I suggested she stay with Rachel for a while. She refused. That house had been hers and Paul's for 30 years. Leaving felt like abandoning him. That was the first time I understood how much grief had trapped her there. She still kept Paul's shirts in half the closet. His coffee mug remained beside the sink. His reading glasses were on the living room end table. Nobody had moved them since he died. I recognized the behavior because I had done the same thing with Eric. Different objects, same logic. If you leave enough of someone untouched, part of your brain pretends they might return. About 2 weeks after the holiday, Dennis called me. Not Rachel. Me, his voice sounded clearer. He said he was staying at a shelter in Akron. He wanted to know whether Linda was okay. I said yes. Then I asked what he had seen downstairs. He went quiet. I told him police had searched the crawl space. Nothing was there. Dennis said, good. I asked about the circular marks. Another pause. He asked whether they were still showing up. That scared me. I said no, though I hadn't checked recently. He told me to look at the heating equipment. Why? Just look. Then he hung up. That evening, I went to Linda's house. Rachel came with me. Her mother remained upstairs. I brought work gloves, a flashlight, and my phone. The furnace casing looked normal until I walked behind it. Along the narrow side, facing the foundation, were several greasy circles. Maybe 12, each about the width of a coin. They ran upward, not randomly, starting near the floor, climbing the side panel, continuing onto a metal duct overhead. I wiped one with a rag. The residue smelled faintly like pennies. Rachel stood behind me. What makes that? I don't know. We took photographs. Then a noise came from the crawl space. A slow exhale. At least that is what it sounded like. Rachel grabbed my jacket. I told her it was probably air moving through insulation. The plywood shifted. This time, we both saw it. The panel pushed outward, paused, then settled. Rachel wanted to leave. I agreed. As we turned, something touched the furnace behind us. A soft, wet contact. We ran upstairs. Neither of us laughed afterward. The next morning, the marks were still there. Linda saw them. So did the contractor. He had no explanation. He cleaned the metal with solvent. The stains faded, but did not disappear completely. That was the first physical evidence that lasted. We stopped treating everything as Dennis's problem. Linda called an exterminator. Then another inspector. Nothing. No animal activity. No foundation opening large enough for a person. No leaking pipe producing residue. The furnace itself was operating normally. A month passed. Dennis entered a treatment program. Rachel spoke to him several times. He sounded better. He refused to discuss the house. January brought heavy snow. For a while, everything stopped. The lower level remained quiet. Linda started relaxing. Then, during the second week of February, her heat failed. It was below 20 degrees outside. She called me because Rachel was working. I drove over after dinner. The furnace would ignite, run briefly, then shut down. I'm not an HVAC technician, but I knew enough to check the filter and obvious things before calling emergency service. Linda stayed upstairs. I went down alone. The new filter looked clean. No strange smell. No moisture. I crouched beside the unit. Then I noticed the plywood panel was open. About 6 inches. I had not touched it. A strip of darkness showed beyond the edge. I should have gone upstairs. Instead, I walked closer. There was a practical reason. If insulation had fallen against the pipe or vent, maybe it explained the heating problem. I pointed my flashlight through the gap. Nothing. Dirt floor. Joists, pink insulation. Then the beam caught something farther back. A hand. I thought it belonged to a person lying on the ground. I nearly shouted. The hand rested flat in the dirt. Long fingers, grayish skin. Then I noticed the tips. Each one ended in a smooth round pad, not a nail. A flat circular surface, slightly darker than the rest of the finger. The same size as the stains we had been finding. The hand moved. It did not pull away. Instead, the fingers lifted one at a time. Each pad detached from the dirt with a faint, tacky sound. I stumbled backward. The plywood shot inward. something struck it from the other side. I ran upstairs. Linda saw my face and asked what happened. I told her an animal was under the addition. That was another lie. I don't know why I kept lying to people in that house. Maybe because saying what I saw would force me to believe it. We left immediately. An emergency technician came an hour later. He got the furnace running. He said the flame sensor needed cleaning. Simple, normal, before leaving, I asked him to look inside the crawl space. He did. Nothing was there. The dirt showed no body impression, no track, nothing, except 5 dark circles close together near the entrance. I photographed them. They remained visible for days. When Dennis called that weekend, I told him what I had seen. He didn't sound surprised. What was it? He said, I don't know. Did it touch you? Long silence. Then he said yes. He told me the bruises around his wrists came from the first night he slept downstairs. He woke because something was pulling him off the mattress. He thought Linda had discovered him. When he opened his eyes, nobody was standing above him. 2 hands were gripping his wrists from beneath the bed. He kicked free. The next morning, he moved the mattress farther from the crawl space. A few nights later, he woke to find the plywood open. Something was standing beside the furnace. He saw only part of it. An arm, a narrow shoulder, the side of a head. Dennis said the skin looked ordinary until it moved. Then, the surface seemed to tighten in sections. I asked about the fingertips. He became quiet again. Finally, he said, "Those are what I remember." I asked why he stayed. His answer was simple. Because I was using, and I didn't have anywhere else. That was exactly the kind of terrible decision addiction makes possible. I asked why he hid behind the furnace when I came downstairs on the holiday. Dennis said he had heard something moving in the crawl space minutes before the doorbell rang. He was hiding from it, not from us. The police visit happened while he was already pressed into that narrow gap. When Linda sent me downstairs, he thought whatever lived under the addition had drawn us there. That was why he begged me to stay quiet. I still wasn't sure whether I believed him, but I believed his fear. Then he said something that changed the way I thought about the entire situation. The mattress wasn't mine. I reminded him he had already told me that. No, he said. I mean, I never saw who put it there. He had first entered Linda's house through the garage almost 3 weeks before the holiday. The sleeping setup was already in place. The extension cord, blankets, television, food trash. He assumed another homeless person was using the space. For several nights, he avoided the house. Eventually, cold weather forced him back. He never saw anyone else. Food continued disappearing from the mattress area. New wrappers appeared. The old refrigerator door sometimes stood open. Dennis thought another squatter was entering while he was gone. Then he started waking to the noises under the addition. I asked whether the van had been parked near Linda's house before those 3 weeks. He said no. That didn't match what the police told us. Neighbors had reportedly seen it there from time to time for more than a month. Dennis insisted he had been living in Kentucky during that period. Rachel later confirmed that. He had messages, motel receipts, and people who had seen him. I asked if someone else could have used the vehicle. He said he had the only key. None of that proved anything supernatural. People get dates wrong. Neighbors misremember vehicles. Still, it bothered me. By March, Linda agreed to stay with Rachel temporarily. We packed clothes and important papers. She refused to sell the house yet. She said she needed time. The place remained mostly empty for several weeks. I checked it every few days. Nothing changed. The cameras showed no break-ins. Snow in the backyard remained undisturbed. Mail accumulated normally. The greasy circles faded from the furnace casing after repeated cleaning. I started believing distance had solved the problem. Then, Linda asked me to retrieve Paul's old photo albums from a storage shelf downstairs. I went during daylight. It was a Saturday afternoon. Bright sun, neighbors outside. Nothing about the situation felt threatening. I carried 2 plastic bins upstairs. On my third trip, I noticed the mattress. It was back, not the same one. A different mattress had been placed in almost exactly the same spot. Narrow, stained, no sheets. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at it. The house had been locked. The camera covering the cellar door had recorded nobody going down. The garage camera showed no entry. The back door remained secure. I called police. 2 officers came. They searched the entire property. Nothing. The mattress had no label, no obvious blood, no identification. They carried it outside. One officer found something underneath. A small steel ring. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Eric. My brother wore it on his right hand for years. After he died, my mother gave it to me. I didn't wear rings, so I kept it on a thin chain around my neck. That chain was under my shirt at that exact moment. I reached up. The necklace was still there. The ring attached to it was gone. The clasp remained closed. I had worn it that morning. I remembered touching it while driving. I showed the officers the empty chain. They looked uncomfortable. One asked whether I could have lost the ring during an earlier visit. I said maybe. I didn't believe that. The steel band was sitting in dust beneath a mattress that should not have been inside the locked house. The officer put it in a small evidence envelope because I insisted. I took it home later. From that point, I stopped pretending I was uninvolved. The house had taken something connected to my brother. That is how I thought about it. Maybe irrationally. Still, the guilt I carried around Eric returned immediately. The unanswered phone call, the idea that I had abandoned him when he needed me, it became mixed with what I had done to Dennis. Once again, I had tried to handle someone's crisis privately because I wanted to correct an old failure. Instead, I had hidden the truth and left Linda in danger. Rachel finally confronted me. She said I was treating Dennis like a second chance. She was right. Saving him would not change what happened to Eric. Failing him would not make me responsible for Eric either. I started seeing a therapist soon afterward. That matters because the final confrontation happened after I had begun understanding why I kept returning to the house. It wasn't courage. Part of me wanted proof. Part of me wanted punishment. Linda finally decided to sell in April. Before listing the property, she hired a contractor to remove the old wooden partition, close the crawl space entrance properly, and replace damaged drywall. The work was scheduled for a Monday. On Sunday evening, Rachel and I went over to remove the last personal belongings. Linda stayed at Rachel's apartment. The house was nearly empty. No television, few chairs, bare shelves. Without furniture, every sound traveled farther. Our voices echoed slightly through the first floor. We worked until around 9. Rain had started, not heavy, just steady enough to make the patio roof hiss. I was carrying a box through the kitchen when the lights dimmed. Rachel looked up. They returned. A few seconds later, something dropped downstairs. A heavy object. We froze. I told her to go outside. She refused. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter. We stood beside the cellar door. Another noise came from below. A short scrape. Then silence. I called 911 before opening anything. I told the dispatcher we believed someone might be inside. While we waited, a voice came from downstairs. Mark, my name. It was Dennis. I recognized him. Rachel did too. She opened the door before I could stop her. Dennis? No answer. Then we heard him again. Help me. Rachel started down. I grabbed her arm. Something about the voice bothered me. Not the sound, the location. Dennis was in Akron. At least he was supposed to be. Rachel called his phone. We heard a ringing tone downstairs, faint behind the furnace. She looked at me. The call went to voicemail. A second later, Dennis's phone started ringing in Rachel's hand. Her screen showed his name calling back. She answered. His real voice came through immediately. "Hey, Rachel went white." From downstairs, the other voice said, "Help me." The phone nearly fell from her hand. Dennis heard it through the call. He started shouting for us to leave. We backed into the kitchen. The lower door slammed shut by itself. Not slowly, hard enough to rattle dishes in a cardboard box. I grabbed Rachel. We moved toward the front entrance. The kitchen lights went out. The living room remained on. Something hit the cellar door from below. The wood bowed inward. Rachel screamed. Another impact came. The knob shook. Police were still on the way. We reached the foyer. The front deadbolt would not turn. I pulled harder. Nothing. Rachel ran toward the back door. It opened. Cold rain blew into the kitchen. She stepped onto the patio. I was directly behind her when the cellar door broke open. The latch tore through the frame. I heard wood split. Then something moved across the kitchen floor. Fast, I turned. For the first time, I saw all of it. It was roughly the height of an average man. Very thin. The skin was not pale or black or anything dramatic. It was a dull yellow-brown, almost the color of old insulation paper. Its head looked human enough that my brain kept trying to assign a face to it. The eyes were ordinary, the nose small, the mouth closed. The most disturbing part was the hands. Every fingertip ended in a flat circular pad, smooth, dark around the rim. When one hand touched the tile, those discs spread slightly against the surface. The creature pulled itself forward, its knees barely bent. The arms did most of the work. That explained the marks, the greasy circles, the bruises on Dennis, the stains beneath the mattress. I backed toward the patio. Rachel screamed my name. One of its hands struck the refrigerator. 5 round prints appeared instantly on the white metal. It reached me before I crossed the threshold. The fingers closed around my right wrist. The grip was incredibly strong. Those smooth pads stuck to my skin. Not like suction exactly, more like adhesive. I pulled. Nothing. The thing dragged me backward. I fell. My shoulder hit the kitchen floor. Rachel grabbed my jacket. For several seconds, we were both pulling against it. The creature did not make a sound. No growl, no scream, only the faint, sticky release of those finger pads shifting against my arm. My sleeve tore. I kicked its chest. It barely reacted. Then it reached for my face. I grabbed a wooden chair leg beside me and swung. The chair had been turned upside down on the table for moving. The leg struck the side of its head. Its skin shifted. Not the skull, the surface. The face slid several inches toward the ear, then slowly settled back. I screamed. Rachel grabbed a metal baking tray from a box and hit the hand attached to my wrist. The grip loosened. I tore free. We ran onto the patio. The creature followed. Rain hit it. For the first time, it stopped. Those round fingertips pressed against the doorframe. Its head tilted. Then the face changed slightly. The mouth opened. Eric's voice came out. My brother. Clear. Calm. Pick up. Those were the last words from a voicemail he had left me several weeks before he died. Not the final call. An older one. I had listened to that message hundreds of times after his death. Nobody outside my family had ever heard it. My legs stopped working. Rachel pulled me. The thing said it again. Pick up. I nearly went back toward the house. That is the part I am most ashamed to admit. For half a second, grief overpowered everything I knew. I wanted one more word, one more chance. Rachel slapped my shoulder and screamed, "That is not him." The creature moved through the doorway. I backed into the yard. My shoes slid in wet grass. It came toward me on all fours. The fingertips left dark circles on the patio boards. I ran for the side gate. Rachel was ahead. The gate latch stuck. She pulled again. Behind us, I heard that wet contact against concrete. Closer, I turned. The creature was halfway across the patio. One arm reached forward. I shoved Rachel through the gate when it opened. Something caught the back of my jeans. I fell against the fence. The creature pulled. Fabric tore from my thigh to my knee. One circular fingertip pressed directly against the back of my calf. A sharp, burning pain went through my leg. I kicked backward. My heel connected with its wrist. The grip released. Police lights appeared at the end of the street. I crawled through the gate. Rachel slammed it. The thing hit the other side. The cedar boards shook. Then, everything stopped. Officers arrived less than a minute later. They entered the house with weapons drawn. Nobody was inside. They searched the cellar, the crawl space, garage, yard, attic, nothing. The broken stairway door remained on the kitchen floor. 5 oily circles marked the refrigerator. More were visible across the patio. My jeans were torn. There were deep bruises around my wrist. On my calf, 5 round areas had broken the skin. The marks stayed visible for almost 3 weeks. Police photographed them. They also photographed the patio. Several dark prints remained even after the rain. No normal footprints accompanied them. Inside, the crawl space panel had been torn away. The plywood was split through the center. The contractor arrived the next morning and inspected everything with police present. Several joists under the addition were scratched. Fresh dirt had been pushed outward. No tunnel existed. No exterior entrance. Nothing beneath the house was large enough to explain where a person could have gone. Linda never slept there again. The sale was delayed. The contractor refused to continue until the lower section was inspected structurally. Dennis completed treatment. He came to see us once. When I showed him the photographs of my injuries, he started crying. He said the marks on his wrists had looked exactly the same. I apologized for not telling Linda the truth that first night. He told me something I still think about. "You thought I was the scary thing down there." He wasn't angry. He just sounded tired. He was right. The first time I found him behind the furnace, barefoot and half-dressed, I assumed I had discovered the worst part of the situation. A sick man hiding in his sister's house. In reality, he had been hiding too. Linda eventually sold the property to a redevelopment company instead of another family. They planned to gut the interior. Before demolition began, the contractor contacted me. He remembered that I had asked to be told if they found anything beneath the addition. Rachel didn't want me to go. I went anyway. By then, we had broken up. Not because of the house. At least not entirely. We were both tired. The relationship had survived more fear than it was built to carry. The contractor had removed most of the lower partition. The furnace was disconnected. Part of the concrete wall had been opened because moisture readings suggested an empty pocket behind it. There should not have been one. The original building plans showed solid fill beneath that section. Instead, workers found a narrow vertical cavity between the foundation and the later addition. It extended almost 9 feet, too tight for an adult to move comfortably, wide enough for something thin. The interior surfaces were covered with circular stains, hundreds, some near the floor, others continuing upward along the concrete until they disappeared behind the kitchen wall. The contractor showed me photographs. Then he handed me a clear evidence-style bag. Something had been found at the deepest point. It was Eric's steel ring. The one police had returned to me months earlier. I had put it back on the chain around my neck. My hand went to my chest. The chain was still there. So was the ring. The contractor and I stood in silence while I took mine off and placed it beside the one from the wall. Same scratch near the edge. Same tiny dent from when Eric dropped a toolbox on it years earlier. Same size. Same weight. I turned the recovered ring over. 5 small dark circles marked the inside. The metal was still warm. I was 17 when the first incident happened, and for a long time I refused to connect it with anything supernatural. Even now, I'm careful about what I call it. I know what I heard, I know what my mother heard, and I know what was later found in our house. Beyond that, I can't prove what caused any of it. My parents still own the place. They no longer use my old bedroom. The house is a brick ranch, built in 1956 outside Dayton, Ohio. From the road, it looks small, but the property slopes sharply toward the backyard, so the rear half sits higher above the ground. The main floor has 3 bedrooms along one hallway. My parents' room is closest to the living room, the bathroom is in the middle, and mine was at the far end, facing the back lawn. My bedroom had one large pane directly above an old metal heating register. That register matters. Most of the home had been updated before we moved in, but the heating system was a strange mixture of newer equipment and older ductwork. The grill beneath my sleeping area wasn't connected to the same branch as the other upstairs outlets. According to my dad, it had once been part of a return air system installed decades earlier. The rectangular shaft dropped straight through the wall cavity into the cellar. There was another unusual thing about the lower level. You couldn't reach it from inside. At some point before my parents bought the property, a previous owner had removed the interior staircase to make space for a larger kitchen pantry. The only entrance left was through 2 heavy storm doors built into the foundation behind the garage. If you wanted to go down there, you had to leave through the kitchen, walk across the rear patio, follow the narrow concrete path beside the garage, lift one of those slanted doors, and descend 8 steps underground. During daylight, that wasn't a problem. At 3 in the morning, it felt very different. My father used the cellar more than anyone else. The furnace, water heater, electrical panel, and laundry connections were all down there. He kept tools on one wall and a small worktable near the boiler. Dad worked nights at a packaging plant about 20 minutes away. His normal shift ran from 10 in the evening until 6 the next morning. Most weekdays, that left my mother and me alone after dark. I had an older brother named Ryan, but he wasn't living with us anymore. He had died 2 years earlier. Ryan was 21. I was 15. He was killed when his pickup went off a county road during heavy rain and struck a tree. There was nothing mysterious about the accident. No other vehicle was involved. Police believed he entered a curve too quickly, lost traction, and overcorrected. The reason I struggled with his death was that he had been driving because of me. That evening, I had gone to a friend's house without telling my parents exactly where I was. Another group showed up, alcohol appeared, and things became uncomfortable. I called Ryan because I knew he wouldn't lecture me. He came immediately. Rain had started before he arrived. I remember standing under my friend's porch while water ran off the roof and seeing his headlights come around the corner. He was annoyed, but not angry. On the drive back, I apologized. He said, "You owe me breakfast tomorrow." That was the last full sentence he ever said to me. About 10 minutes later, we reached my street. I got out. Ryan didn't live with us anymore, so he continued toward his apartment. He never made it there. For years, I understood logically that I hadn't caused the crash. Emotionally, logic didn't matter much. If I hadn't called, he wouldn't have been on that road. That thought followed me everywhere. His bedroom had originally been the room at the far end of our hallway. After he moved out, my parents turned it into a spare room. After he died, nobody touched it for almost a year. Eventually, my mother asked whether I wanted to move into it because it was larger than mine. At first, I said no. A few months later, I changed my mind. Part of me wanted to be near his things. Dad removed most of the furniture, but I kept Ryan's old wooden desk and one narrow bookcase. His posters were gone. His clothes had been donated. Still, little traces remained. There was a chip in the closet door from when he threw a hockey puck indoors as a kid. His initials were scratched underneath the desk. One corner of the ceiling had a faint yellow stain from a roof leak he used to complain about. That room felt connected to him without looking like a memorial. For the first year, I liked sleeping there. Then I woke up at 3:08 one morning because something was striking the glass. My first thought was that I was dreaming. The noise was incredibly regular. Not random, not the loose tapping of a tree branch. A heavy impact arrived at the same interval each time. Thud, a short pause. Another strike. Then another. There was no change in speed. I stayed under my blanket listening. My bed was against the wall opposite the opening, so I could see the curtains from where I lay. They weren't moving. The weather outside was calm. It was early October and cool enough that we had started running the heat at night. No storm was passing through. No rain, no noticeable wind. The force increased. The frame trembled slightly. I sat up. For a few seconds, I considered pulling the curtain aside. I couldn't make myself do it. The rhythm felt too deliberate. If someone had thrown rocks, the timing would vary. If a bird was trapped somewhere, there would be fluttering or scratching. This was controlled, exactly spaced. My imagination immediately produced the worst possibility. Someone standing in the backyard and hitting the pane with a fist. I grabbed my phone and left the room. The hallway floor was cold against my feet. The pounding continued behind me. By the time I reached my mother's door, I could feel each impact through the wall. I woke her. At first, she looked irritated. Then another blow traveled through the house. She sat up quickly. What is that? I don't know. The next one came. Her bedroom glass gave a faint rattle in its frame. That was what frightened her. Whatever was happening near my sleeping area was strong enough to vibrate something almost 30 feet away. Mom put on her robe. Neither of us wanted to admit we were afraid. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from her nightstand. I followed her down the hallway. The pattern never changed. We reached my doorway. She stopped there. The curtains were closed. Everything else looked normal. Another impact landed. The entire wall seemed to shiver. Mom pointed the flashlight toward the glass, even though the lamp beside my bed was already on. Stay back. She moved closer. I remember telling her not to open the curtain. She ignored me. She pulled one side away. Nothing. The backyard beyond the pane was empty. Our porch light illuminated part of the grass. The wooden privacy fence stood about 40 feet farther out. No person was near the wall. The next strike happened while we were looking directly at the glass. The pane shook. Nothing touched it. My mother dropped the curtain. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The steady impacts continued. She checked the latch. Locked. Then she pressed her palm against the frame. Another pulse came through. She jerked her hand away. "That's not outside," she said. At the time, that sentence scared me more than anything else. We decided to check anyway. Mom took Dad's large flashlight. I grabbed a fireplace poker, which was ridiculous, but made me feel better. We went through the kitchen and stepped onto the rear patio. The moment the exterior door closed behind us, everything stopped. No pounding, no vibration, Nothing. The night was completely still. We stood close together under the porch light. I could hear traffic far away on the interstate. Somebody's air conditioner hummed several houses over. A dog gave one short bark in another yard. That was all. We walked toward the outside wall beneath my bedroom. There were no footprints in the flower bed, no damaged siding, no branches close enough to reach the pane. Mom shined the flashlight upward. The glass looked normal. I checked along the fence. Nothing. We stayed outside for almost 5 minutes. Not one impact occurred. Eventually, my mother said, maybe it stopped. We went back inside. The instant the kitchen door shut, the rhythm returned. It was so immediate that we both froze. One heavy pulse. Pause, another. Mom looked at me. I remember whispering, no. We walked down the hallway again. This time, instead of staring at the glass, my mother crouched near the floor. She placed her hand against the wall beneath the frame. Another impact landed. Her head snapped toward the metal grill. Here, I knelt beside her. The old register sat about 6 inches above the baseboard. When the next blow came, I saw the thin steel cover flex outward. Not much, maybe a 1/4 inch. But enough. The vibration we had mistaken for someone hitting the pane was traveling upward through the wall. Mom held the flashlight close. The narrow slats were black inside. Another forceful hit came from somewhere below us. The metal jumped. I moved backward. We suddenly understood where it led. A cellar. Neither of us said we should investigate. There are moments in frightening stories where people make decisions that no reasonable person would make. They hear something under the floor and immediately walk downstairs alone. We did the opposite. My mother said, we are not opening those doors tonight. I agreed before she finished speaking. She called Dad at work. I listened while she explained. He asked practical questions. Was the furnace running? Yes. Did we smell gas? No. Was the heat working normally? As far as we knew. Had the carbon monoxide detector gone off? No. Dad suggested the duct might be expanding because of a temperature change. He also mentioned water pressure and an old damper plate somewhere inside the return shaft. Mom asked if either of those things could hit hard enough to shake the house. He hesitated. That hesitation bothered me. Finally, he said he would look when he got home. We decided to sleep in my parents' room. I brought a blanket and lay on the floor. The pounding lasted another 40 minutes. It never sped up, never slowed. Then, at about 3:50, it stopped. There was no final crash, no gradual fading. One moment the rhythm was there. The next interval arrived, and nothing followed. I barely slept. Dad came home shortly after 6. We took him to my room immediately. Everything looked normal. He removed the grill with a screwdriver. The duct behind it was dusty but clear. He shined a light down as far as possible. Nothing obvious. After breakfast, he went outside and entered the lower level. I stayed upstairs. Even during daylight, I didn't want to go with him. He spent about half an hour inspecting the furnace and the vertical shaft. Eventually, he returned carrying a short piece of rusted metal. He said it was part of an old damper that had come loose years ago. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then he explained that the part had been lying on the floor beneath the duct. It wasn't attached to anything. It couldn't have been causing the impacts. Mom asked what could. Dad said he didn't know. A few days later, he brought in an HVAC technician. The man checked the furnace, return lines, vents, supports, blower, and nearby pipes. Nothing looked dangerous. He suggested that old houses sometimes transmit mechanical vibration in strange ways. I asked what mechanical equipment could create a perfectly timed force for almost an hour. He shrugged. He wasn't dismissive. He simply didn't have an answer. For several weeks, nothing else happened. I slowly stopped thinking about it. Then, on the last Sunday of October, I found Ryan's keychain beneath my bed. It was a cheap silver bottle opener shaped like a fish. I recognized it immediately. He had carried it for years. After his accident, police returned his personal belongings to my parents in a plastic evidence bag. His wallet, watch, phone, keys, and some coins were all inside. Mom had given me the little bottle opener because I used to joke about how ugly it was. I kept it in my desk for a while. Then I packed it into a small box with a few photographs and moved that box to the top shelf of the closet. I had not taken the item out in months, yet there it was beneath my bed. I assumed I must have dropped it somehow. That explanation wasn't convincing, but it was possible. I placed it back inside the box. 2 nights later, I woke at 2:41. The steady impact had returned. This time, the force was weaker. I didn't run immediately. I sat up and listened. The intervals were the same as before. 1 strike every 2 seconds. I stared at the curtain. Then I looked toward the grill. The metal cover moved slightly with each pulse. I called my mother from bed. She answered half asleep. It's happening again. She came down the hall. Dad was working. We didn't go outside. Instead, Mom called him immediately. While she talked, I noticed something different. The rhythm had changed. Not faster. The spacing stayed identical. But every 8th impact was softer. I counted. 7 heavy pulses. 1 quiet. 7 more. Another weak one. I counted again. Same result. I told Mom. She listened and confirmed it. Dad heard us talking over the phone. He asked us to record it. I used my phone. I still have that recording. It lasts 6 minutes and 13 seconds. Most people I've played it for say the same thing. It sounds like someone using a padded hammer on the other side of a wall. The pattern is extremely consistent. Near the end, my mother can be heard counting quietly. At number 8, the force is noticeably different. That night, the activity lasted about 20 minutes. Then it ended. The following morning, Dad opened the storm doors and checked the utility area again. I finally went with him. I had avoided that place since we moved into the house. The stairs were narrow concrete steps with painted brick walls on both sides. At the bottom was a heavy wooden door leading into the main lower room. The air smelled like warm dust and laundry detergent. The ceiling was low, bare bulbs hung between floor joists. The furnace occupied the center. Dad showed me where the old return shaft came down from my bedroom. It was a rectangular metal column attached to the wall. The bottom had been capped years earlier. I expected to see something loose. There was nothing. Then, Dad crouched. The cap at the bottom was dented. 8 shallow depressions formed a horizontal line across the metal. He stared at them. I asked whether they had always been there. He said he didn't remember seeing them. Most were ordinary round dents. The 8th was smaller. We counted from left to right. 7 larger marks. 1 faint indentation. Exactly like the rhythm from the night before. Dad took photographs. He tried pressing the metal with his thumb. It barely moved. Whatever caused those depressions had used significant force. He removed the bottom plate. Inside the duct was a thick layer of dust. No tool, no animal nest, no fallen object. Nothing that could repeatedly strike the metal from within. We searched the rest of the lower level. Behind the furnace stood a set of storage shelves. Along the far wall were paint cans, old Christmas decorations, and several boxes belonging to Ryan. That stopped me. I didn't know his belongings were down there. After his death, I assumed Mom had kept everything in the garage attic. Dad noticed where I was looking. He said Mom couldn't bring herself to donate all of it. One cardboard box contained Ryan's high school notebooks, baseball gloves, a jacket, several books, and random things from his apartment. I opened it. The smell hit me immediately. Not anything supernatural, just him. Laundry soap, old fabric, a trace of the deodorant he always used. It had been 2 years since I smelled that combination. My throat tightened. Dad put a hand on my shoulder. I almost closed the box. Then I noticed something lying on top of the jacket. The silver fish bottle opener. I stared at it. I knew I had placed mine in the closet upstairs. I picked this one up. Same scratches, same bent tail, same tiny blue paint mark near the mouth. There weren't two. I ran upstairs. The box in my closet was open. The keychain was gone. I asked Mom whether she had moved it. She said no. Dad suggested I might have carried it downstairs without remembering. I became angry, not because his explanation was unreasonable, because I desperately wanted it to be true. I told him I hadn't. He said he believed me. That made it worse. Over the next month, the activity changed. The heavy rhythm didn't happen every night. Sometimes a week passed without anything. Then I would be doing homework and feel a single vibration beneath my feet. Another would follow several seconds later. The register no longer seemed like the only source. Sometimes the pulse traveled through the wall beside the closet. Other times it came through the floor under my desk. Once, my lamp shook hard enough that the shade slid crooked. My parents started keeping records. Dad wrote the date, time, weather, furnace cycle, and duration in a notebook. He wanted a mechanical explanation. So did I. Nothing matched. Warm nights, cold nights, dry weather, rain, furnace running, system off. There was no pattern except one. The activity almost always happened while Dad was working overnight. He requested a Friday off without telling me. At 2:17 that morning, the noise began. Dad was sitting awake in the living room. The moment he heard it, he went outside. Mom and I stayed upstairs. He entered through the storm doors. Within seconds, the rhythm stopped. Dad searched the entire lower level. Nothing. He came back into the kitchen. Before he had even removed his coat, the steady pulses began again. He turned around and went back outside. Silence. He returned. The impacts resumed. We repeated this 3 times. Eventually, Dad stood in my bedroom while the wall trembled. For the first time, I saw him genuinely frightened. He wasn't panicking. My father is not that kind of person. He simply looked at the grill and said, "That isn't the furnace." In December, things became more personal. I had been struggling emotionally as the anniversary of Ryan's death approached. That time of year was always difficult. Christmas had been his favorite holiday. He used to come over early in the morning, even after moving out. The first year without him had been awful. The second was somehow worse. One evening, Mom and I were sorting decorations in the living room. She found an old plastic ornament with Ryan's name written across it in glitter. I started crying. Not dramatically. I just couldn't stop. Mom sat beside me. I finally told her something I had never admitted. I said I still believed he would be alive if I hadn't called him that night. She looked shocked. "You've been carrying that?" I nodded. She told me Ryan had taken that road hundreds of times. She said he chose to come get me because he loved me. I knew all the things she was saying. I had heard them before. That night, though, something changed. Maybe because I finally said the guilt aloud. I went into my bedroom and took out the few belongings of his I still kept. Photographs, a concert ticket, the ugly fish opener, a birthday card. I sat on the floor reading an old note he had written when we were younger. At the bottom, he had drawn a terrible cartoon of me with huge ears. I laughed. It was the first time in months that remembering him hadn't hurt. Then something struck beneath the floor. One forceful pulse. I stopped smiling. Another came from inside the wall. The third seemed to travel from the register. I stood. The room became very quiet. Instead of the usual steady rhythm, 3 more impacts followed with long gaps between them. I moved toward the hallway. Behind me, the vent cover gave a small metallic creak. I turned. Something was pressing against it from inside. Not striking. Pressing, the center bowed outward. I watched 2 screws slowly pull away from the plaster. I screamed for my mother. She came running. By the time she reached me, one corner of the grill had separated from the wall. Dad was downstairs watching television. He heard me, too. He ran down the hallway. The metal snapped back into place. Nothing else happened. The next morning, Dad removed the cover. Behind it, on the interior surface, were 4 marks. They were not scratches. Each one was an oval patch, where the dust had been wiped clean. The shapes resembled fingertips, except they were too broad, almost flat. Dad took more photographs. He installed a new grill with longer screws. Within a week, 2 of those screws were bent. That was when my parents arranged a full inspection. They hired a heating company, an electrician, and eventually a structural engineer because Dad worried there might be vibration moving through the foundation. Everyone found something minor. Old wiring, a loose joist brace, a pipe hanger that needed replacing. Nothing explained what we were experiencing. The engineer told us the structure was sound. The HVAC company ran the furnace through every cycle they could. No unusual movement. They inspected the vertical return shaft with a small camera. The inside was dusty and empty. The man operating the camera found something strange about halfway down. Several circular areas had been rubbed clean. He assumed a tool had scraped against the metal during installation. Dad asked why the marks appeared in repeating groups. The technician had no answer. By January, I wanted to leave. I started sleeping on the sofa whenever Dad worked nights. That helped for a while. Then the activity followed me. One morning around 2:30, I was lying in the living room when a heavy vibration traveled through the floor beneath the couch. I sat up. Another followed, not from my bedroom, from beneath the living room. The cellar didn't extend that far. I knew the house layout. The lower level ended under the kitchen and rear bedrooms. There was only a crawl space beneath the front half. I woke Mom. She heard the next pulse. We stood in the hallway. The source moved. That is the only way I can describe it. A heavy impact came from under the dining room, then the kitchen, then near the bathroom. Each one separated by the same exact amount of time. It was traveling toward my bedroom. We backed into my parents' room. The final strike came from directly under my old bed. Then silence. Dad found no damage in the crawl space the next day. A month later, my mother discovered bruises on my back. I hadn't noticed them. She saw them when I was changing clothes. There were 4 oval marks along my right shoulder blade, each about the size of a quarter. They didn't hurt much. I had no idea where they came from. Mom photographed them. The following morning, they were darker. Dad compared the picture with the cleaned patches inside the duct. The shapes were similar, not identical enough to prove anything. Close enough that nobody said much afterward. I stopped sleeping alone. For almost 2 months, I slept in my parents' room whenever Dad was gone. Nothing happened there. Eventually, I started feeling foolish. I was 18 by then. Graduation was approaching. I told myself I couldn't spend the rest of my life afraid of a heating register. In April, I returned to my old room. The first few nights were quiet. So were the next several. By May, I believed the worst was over. The confrontation happened on May 14. I remember the date because it was Ryan's birthday. He would have been 24. Dad had gone to work. Mom had fallen asleep around 11. I stayed awake reading. Before midnight, I placed Ryan's bottle opener on the desk beside me. That may sound strange, but I had started carrying it again. I no longer wanted every object connected to him to become something frightening. Around 1:40, I turned off the lamp. I woke sometime later because the air felt wrong. Not cold. Heavy, my ears felt plugged, like being on an airplane. The digital clock showed 3:06. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, one deep impact came from beneath the floor. The mattress trembled. I sat up. Another followed from the wall. I grabbed my phone. Before I could call Mom, the bedroom door swung shut. It didn't slam, it closed slowly. I got out of bed. The pressure in my ears increased. My mouth had gone completely dry. A third pulse came through the register. The new metal cover bowed outward. I reached for the bedroom door. The handle turned. The door wouldn't open. I pulled harder. It felt as if somebody on the other side was holding it. I shouted for Mom. No answer. Another force hit the wall. The grill tore free. 2 screws shot across the carpet. A smell entered the room. Damp concrete. Dust. Something faintly metallic. The opening behind the register was black. I backed toward the bed. A flat shape appeared inside the duct. At first, I thought it was a hand. Then I realized I was looking at several fingers pressed together. They were too wide. The tips were pale and smooth, each ending in a flattened, circular pad rather than a normal nail. One finger pushed through the opening. Then another. They gripped the lower edge of the wall. The plaster cracked. I screamed again. My mother began pounding on the bedroom door from the hallway. She yelled my name. I ran toward her. The door still wouldn't move. Behind me, something pulled itself from the opening beneath the pane. There should not have been enough space. The duct was maybe 10 inches wide. Whatever emerged seemed to fold through it. A shoulder appeared, then part of a head. I don't know how to describe the figure without making it sound more impossible than it already was. It was roughly human in size, not skeletal, not transparent. Its skin had the color of old, unpainted plaster. The surface looked dry, except around the hands. Those were darker. Each fingertip ended in the same broad pad I had seen pushing through the vent. Concentric rings covered them, almost like fingerprints enlarged until they were visible from several feet away. Its face was the worst part, not because it looked monstrous, because most of it looked almost ordinary. 2 eyes, a nose, a closed mouth, but the skin around the cheeks and jaw seemed slightly loose, as if the face didn't fit the shape beneath it. When it moved, the features lagged behind by a fraction of a second, like fabric sliding over something solid. It dragged itself farther into the room. The shoulders came through. Then the torso. Its body did not make the same noise we had heard for months. The noise came from its hands. One palm pressed against the wall. The broad pads struck the plaster together. A deep pulse traveled through the room. That was it. That was what had been shaking the glass. The thing had been hitting the inside of the ductwork with those hands. I grabbed the desk chair and threw it. The chair hit its shoulder. The figure barely reacted. It reached toward me. I ducked. The hand caught the back of my shirt. The fabric tightened around my throat. I fell onto the carpet. My phone slid under the bed. The thing pulled me toward the open duct. That made no physical sense. The opening was too small even for my shoulders, but it kept dragging. My mother was screaming from the hallway. Something struck the bedroom door from outside. Dad had told her to call police if anything happened again, and I heard her yelling into the phone. I grabbed the leg of the bed. The creature pulled harder. My shirt tore. Its fingers slipped. I kicked backward. My heel struck its wrist. The surface felt hard, not like bone, more like striking thick wood beneath rubber. It grabbed my ankle. The pads pressed into my skin. Pain shot up my leg. I kicked with the other foot. The bedroom door burst open. Mom had used a small fire extinguisher from the kitchen to break the latch. She rushed in. For 1 second, she saw it. I know she did. Her face changed. She screamed and swung the extinguisher. It struck the creature's arm. The grip around my ankle released. I crawled toward her. The figure folded backward. Not turned. Folded, its shoulders seemed to collapse inward as it forced itself toward the open duct. Mom grabbed me beneath the arms. We stumbled into the hallway. Before leaving, I looked back once. One of those pale hands was still outside the wall. The fingertips flattened against the floor. The pads flexed. The whole room shook. Then the hand disappeared. We ran outside through the front door. Police arrived shortly afterward. Dad left work and met us in the driveway. I was taken to the emergency room. My ankle had severe bruising and 4 broken patches of skin. The marks formed wide oval shapes. My shirt was torn almost completely across the upper back. There was plaster dust in my hair. Mom had a cut on her palm from breaking the door latch. Those things were real. Police photographed everything. 2 officers searched the house. They found nobody. The register was lying several feet from the wall. The screws had been ripped out. The plaster around the opening was cracked. My desk chair was broken. The bedroom door frame was damaged where Mom had forced it. There were also marks on the carpet. 4 dark smears led from the vent toward the place where I had fallen. They were shaped like wide fingertips. The officers checked the cellar next. Dad went with them. I stayed outside with Mom. About 10 minutes later, one officer returned and asked whether anyone had been working on the duct. Dad said no. They had found fresh dents along the entire vertical shaft. Not random damage. Rows. Some were nearly an inch deep. At the bottom, the metal cap had been torn away. Behind it, the brick foundation was exposed. Several bricks had fresh marks pressed into the dusty surface. Broad, circular pads. Concentric rings. The same pattern that had been left on my ankle. One officer photographed everything. The report eventually described the incident as suspected unlawful entry with an unknown method of access. No person was found. No evidence showed anyone had entered through the storm doors. The exterior locks were intact. We stayed at my aunt's house for almost a month. My parents seriously considered selling. In the end, they didn't. They couldn't afford to move quickly, and Dad refused to take a major loss on the property. Instead, he had the old return shaft removed completely. Workers opened the wall from my bedroom down to the cellar. They replaced insulation, patched the opening, and installed new drywall. My parents turned my room into storage. I moved into Ryan's old, smaller bedroom at the front of the hallway. For nearly a year, nothing happened. I graduated. I started community college. Eventually, I moved into an apartment with 2 friends. My relationship with Ryan's memory changed after that night. Before, I had held on to every painful detail because guilt felt like the last connection I had to him. After what happened in my room, I couldn't do that anymore. Whatever had been inside that wall had used the place where his belongings were stored. It had moved an object connected to him. It had turned my grief into something I feared. For a while, I stopped carrying the bottle opener. Then one day I realized I was letting whatever happened take ownership of my brother. I put the keychain on my car keys. It's still there. My parents almost never mention the incident. Mom will confirm it happened if somebody asks, but she won't describe what she saw. Dad remains more skeptical. He accepts that something damaged the wall and ductwork. He accepts the bruises. He accepts the recordings. He says he doesn't know what caused any of it. That is as far as he will go. The house stayed quiet for several years. Then, last winter, my parents decided to renovate the kitchen. The pantry built over the old interior cellar staircase had always been awkward. Dad wanted to remove it and reopen the original steps so they wouldn't have to go outside to reach the furnace. A contractor started demolition in January. I came over on the second weekend to help. By afternoon, most of the pantry wall had been removed. Behind the drywall, they found the outline of the original staircase. The wooden framing was still there. So was an old door at the bottom, sealed from the cellar side. Dad was excited because reopening it would be easier than expected. The contractor removed several studs. That exposed a narrow cavity beside the former stairwell. Inside was part of the return duct they thought had been completely removed years earlier. A section about 4 feet long had been trapped behind the old wall. Dad called me into the kitchen. The metal was covered in dents, rows and rows of them. Some deep, some faint. Each group contained 8. 7 large impressions. 1 smaller mark. I didn't want to stay. Dad told the contractor to remove the section. When he pulled it free, something fell from behind it. A silver object landed on the floor. Ryan's fish-shaped bottle opener. I reached automatically for my keys. The one I had carried for years was still attached. Dad picked up the object from the kitchen floor. Same shape, same scratches, same tiny blue paint mark near the mouth. There could not have been 2 identical pieces with the same damage. I took mine off the key ring and placed both side by side. They matched perfectly. Even the bent tail. Nobody spoke. The contractor looked confused. Dad turned the piece from inside the wall over. On the back was a dark stain. 4 broad oval impressions surrounded it. The metal beneath those marks was slightly crushed. Then something moved inside the sealed stairwell. One slow impact came from behind the old door. The opener in my hand bent inward. When I was 10, my mother, my older brother Ethan, and I lived in a split-level house on the south side of Anchorage, Alaska. I have told people pieces of what happened there. But I usually stop after the first night, because the rest sounds harder to believe. Even the beginning is enough to make me uncomfortable. Our home backed onto a Yimka property. The recreation building sat beyond a strip of trees and a service road, and one of its exterior security lamps faced our neighborhood. It was the kind used to illuminate a parking area, mounted high enough that nobody nearby could do much about it. At night, that lamp washed the back of our place in a pale yellow glow. My bedroom was downstairs. The lower level was partly below ground, so the bottom of my window sat only a little above the grass outside, even though it was nearly level with my headboard from inside. My bed had been pushed directly beneath it, because the room was small. If I lay flat on my back, the glass was behind and above my head. Across the hall was Ethan's room. Between us was a bathroom we shared. A narrow hallway led to the laundry room, and beyond that was a door into the attached garage. The staircase to the main floor rose beside the bathroom wall. Upstairs were the kitchen, living room, my mother's bedroom, and the front entrance. The backyard was enclosed by a tall wooden fence. That fence had been added while we were temporarily living in Fairbanks. My mother had moved us north for work for less than a year, then returned to Anchorage after her position changed again. When we came back, several homes in the neighborhood had new privacy fencing. Ours was one of them. The fence made the yard feel smaller than I remembered. It was 6 feet high, built from rough cedar boards. The rear boundary ran parallel to the IMCA property, with a narrow strip of ground between our yard and the service lane behind it. A gate stood along the left side of the house, connecting the backyard to the driveway. There was no gate at the rear. That detail became important later. At 10 years old, I didn't like sleeping downstairs. I never admitted that to Ethan because he was 13 and would have made fun of me. My fear had little to do with ghosts. I was afraid of real people. Someone breaking in. Someone watching through a window. A stranger hiding behind the fence. My father had died when I was 7, and after that I became very aware that there wasn't another adult in the house at night. His name was Daniel. He worked as an electrician and died in a vehicle accident outside Palmer during an ice storm. Most of what I remember about him comes in small pieces. His work boots beside the garage door, coffee breath in the morning, the smell of sawdust on his jacket, the way he tapped the roof of the car twice after buckling me into the back seat. I also remember his hands. Dad had lost the end of his left index finger in a work accident before I was born. It wasn't dramatic. The fingers simply ended a little before the first joint. As a child, I thought that was completely normal. I used to hold his hand and rub the smooth end of it with my thumb. After he died, one of the hardest parts was realizing how quickly physical memories fade. You can remember someone's face from pictures. You can hear their voice on a video. But the exact feeling of a person's hand disappears. That bothered me more than I knew how to explain. Mom kept some of his things in boxes in the garage. His tool belt, a winter coat, a handful of notebooks, a red metal toolbox that she never opened. For the first few years after his death, I sometimes went into the garage when nobody else was around just to smell the coat. It sounds strange now, but children do things like that. There was a specific mixture of cold fabric, motor oil, and whatever soap he used. Eventually, even that faded. By the time we returned from Fairbanks, I had begun forgetting details. I hated myself for it. That was the emotional background of what happened, although I didn't understand the connection until much later. The first night was in late September. Anchorage nights get darker quickly once summer ends. By then, the long daylight was mostly gone, and temperatures had started dropping enough that Mom reminded us to close the downstairs windows before bed. I had school the next morning. Ethan was already in his room. Mom was upstairs watching television. I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth in the shared bathroom, then climbed into bed. My window curtains were cheap blue fabric, thin enough that the IMCA security lamp still shone through them. Because the bed sat directly below the window, that light projected everything onto the opposite wall. The outline of the frame, the curtain edges, sometimes branches moving outside. I was used to it. That night, I switched off my bedside lamp and rolled onto my left side. The room stayed dimly lit by the glow behind me. I remember staring at the opposite wall. For maybe a minute, nothing happened. Then a human shape appeared in the light. It was immediate. 1 second, the wall showed the rectangular glow from the window. The next, somebody was standing outside. I froze. The silhouette covered most of the projected rectangle. Head, shoulders, upper torso. The person was extremely close to the glass. At least that was what I assumed. My first thought was Ethan. Maybe he had gone outside and was trying to scare me. Then I remembered he would have needed to walk upstairs, go through the kitchen, unlock the back door, cross the yard, and somehow stand directly outside my lower-level window without making any noise. Still, siblings do stupid things. I almost called his name. Before I could, the figure moved, not away from the house. Sideways, it passed across the window slowly enough that I could follow it on the wall. Then it disappeared. I didn't sit up. I couldn't. People often describe fear as screaming or running. Mine was the opposite. Every muscle locked. I stared at the wall while my heart beat so hard that my pillow seemed to move beneath my ear. The obvious thing would have been to look outside. I refused. The glass was directly behind my head. If I sat up and pulled the curtain, my face would be inches from whoever might be there. I stayed flat. I listened. Nothing, no footsteps in the grass, no gate opening, no voice. The heating system came on somewhere in the house, and air began moving through the vent near the bedroom door. That ordinary sound made me brave enough to move. I slipped out of bed without touching the curtain. I opened my bedroom door and ran across the hallway to Ethan. He was reading a comic book with headphones on. I told him someone had been outside my window. He laughed at first. Then he saw my face. He removed the headphones. "What do you mean, someone?" "A person." "Did you see them?" "I saw them on the wall." That gave him something to tease me about. He said it was probably a tree. I told him trees didn't have shoulders. He got up. I begged him not to look out my window. Naturally, that made him want to do exactly that. We went back together. He turned on the light. Nothing had changed. My curtain hung normally. Ethan walked to it. I stayed near the doorway. He pulled it open fast. The backyard was empty. The fence stood beyond the grass. The light from the IMCA made the top edges of the boards glow. No person. Ethan unlocked the window. I told him not to. He opened it a few inches and leaned closer. Cold air entered the room. He looked left, then right. Nothing, I asked him to close it. He did. We told Mom. She came downstairs wearing her robe. Unlike Ethan, she didn't laugh. She checked the back door first. Locked, then the side gate. Still latched. She walked around the house with a flashlight while we watched from the kitchen window. Nobody was outside. When she came back, she said I might have seen someone moving behind the fence. The security light could throw strange shapes. That was reasonable. I wanted it to be true. The problem was the fence. From my bedroom, the lamp behind the IMCA shone toward our house. For someone behind the rear fence to cast a full human outline onto my bedroom wall, they would have needed to block the light at exactly the right angle. Mom said perspective can be strange at night. I accepted that because I was 10 and wanted to sleep. She moved my bed away from the window. That helped immediately. The headboard now sat against the right-hand wall, so the glass was several feet from me instead of inches above my pillow. For the next week, nothing happened. I stopped thinking about it. Then we found the first physical mark. It was a Saturday morning. Mom was trimming dead plants near the foundation. She called Ethan outside, then called me. Beneath my window, the ground was disturbed. The grass had been pressed flat in one narrow area. There were no normal footprints. Instead, 4 shallow depressions sat close to the house. Each was roughly oval. They looked like someone had placed the rounded ends of a tool into the soil and leaned on it. 2 were near the foundation. 2 were slightly farther back. Mom assumed they came from a ladder. We didn't own a ladder narrow enough to leave marks like that, but a contractor had worked on the siding months earlier. She pressed one spot with her shoe. The ground was soft from rain. That explanation seemed good enough. Then Ethan noticed the siding. Below the window frame were several smudges. Gray, almost greasy. Mom wiped one with a paper towel. It left a dark streak. She smelled it. It's probably dirt. The marks were roughly hand height for an adult standing outside. She cleaned them off. By afternoon, I had mostly forgotten. The second incident happened 11 nights later. I know because Mom later wrote dates in a notebook. I woke around 1:30 in the morning. Not from a sound, from light. The curtain looked brighter than usual. I sat up. The Imca lamp was still shining through it. But something was wrong with the pattern. A narrow vertical strip of darkness divided the center. At first, I thought the curtains had separated. Then, the dark line widened. Something outside was moving closer to the glass. I watched the opposite wall. The projection changed. A person-shaped outline slowly formed. This time, I could see more detail. One shoulder was higher than the other. The head leaned slightly to the left. I didn't move. A hand rose. I could see its shape against the curtain. 5 fingers. Except one seemed wrong. The index finger was shorter. It ended early. My stomach dropped. I thought of my father immediately. That detail was too specific. I whispered, "Dad?" The hand remained there. I didn't hear anything outside. For a few seconds, hope overcame fear. That is hard to explain without sounding foolish. I knew Dad was dead. I understood death. I had been to the funeral. I had seen my mother cry for years. But I was still 10. Some part of me wanted impossible things. The hand shifted against the light. Then the shortened finger extended. It touched the glass. A faint squeak came from the pane. The sound destroyed whatever comfort I had felt. Dad would have knocked, or waved, or done something familiar. This hand simply pressed harder. The glass gave a tiny creak. I backed off the mattress. Another finger joined it. Then another. The palm flattened against the outside. I could see something else now. The fingers were too wide near the tips, not hugely deformed, just wrong enough that my brain kept trying to correct them. I ran. This time I went upstairs. Mom woke the moment I entered her room. I told her someone was back. She grabbed the phone and turned on every light. We woke Ethan. All 3 of us stayed upstairs. Mom called our neighbor, Mr. Collins, who lived 2 houses away and worked early mornings. He answered immediately. She asked if he could look outside before coming over. He did. Nobody was in our yard. He drove around the block anyway. Nothing. Mom considered calling police, but worried she would be reporting a shadow. Mr. Collins came inside with a baseball bat. He and Ethan checked downstairs. I remained with Mom. A few minutes later, Ethan shouted, not in fear, more confusion. He had found something. The inside of my window was wet, not condensation. 4 oval spots of moisture sat on the glass. They looked like fingerprints viewed from far away. The strange part was that they were inside. Mom touched one. Her finger came away damp. We hadn't opened the window. The latch was still closed. Mr. Collins inspected the frame. Nothing looked forced. He suggested condensation could form in patterns. Mom accepted that publicly. After he left, she locked the bedroom door and told me I could sleep upstairs. I slept on the floor beside her bed. The next morning, the moisture was gone. The greasy marks outside had returned. This time, they were higher. One smear crossed the lower part of the frame. Mom called the police non-emergency number. An officer came by that afternoon. He checked the yard and fence. No sign of forced entry. The side gate latch worked. There were no shoe prints. He asked whether neighborhood teenagers might be playing a prank. Mom said it was possible. He suggested a motion light and inexpensive camera. Within a few days, she bought both. The camera pointed toward the rear yard from above the kitchen door. It covered my bedroom window, most of the lawn, and the fence. For almost a month, we had no problems. Winter started setting in. The ground hardened. The first light snow came and melted. School took over my attention. Mom stopped checking the camera every morning. Then, one Wednesday, Ethan woke everyone shortly after 2. He had heard something in the bathroom. Our shared bathroom was between the bedrooms. The window there was smaller and higher. He said someone had dragged a fingernail across the glass. Mom came downstairs. We listened. Nothing. Ethan turned on the bathroom light. The room was empty. The window was locked. Then a faint sound came from inside the wall. Not scratching, more like fabric pulling slowly across rough wood. It moved from the bathroom toward my bedroom. Mom told us to go upstairs. We did. From the top of the stairs, I heard something make contact with my window. One soft touch, then another. No pattern, just patient pressure against the glass. Mom called the police. 2 officers arrived. They searched the outside first. There was fresh snow on the ground, less than an inch. No tracks crossed the backyard. None came from the side gate. The entire lawn was clean. One officer walked along the fence with his flashlight. He found something near the rear corner. A section of cedar had been pushed inward, not broken. Bent, several nails had worked loose. It looked like someone had leaned tremendous weight against it from the opposite side. The snow outside that section was untouched, too. The officers examined the camera. It had stopped recording at 1:47. No power failure, no damaged wire. The file simply ended. Recording resumed at 2:19 after police were already there. That was the first night my mother looked truly frightened. Not nervous, not concerned. Frightened, she didn't tell us everything. I found that out years later. Before Dad died, he had installed much of the electrical work in the basement and garage himself. Mom sometimes found little notes he had written on studs or junction boxes, measurements, wire labels. Reminders. She told me later that when the officer shined his light across the damaged fence, she had a strange memory. Dad had built part of that fence line before we moved to Fairbanks. Not the whole structure. Only temporary posts along the rear edge, because he wanted a barrier between us and the service road. One afternoon, he cut his hand on a nail. Mom remembered him pressing his left palm against one of the boards while she wrapped it. The board police found bent inward was in roughly the same place. She didn't mention it because she knew it sounded irrational. By December, I was sleeping upstairs most nights. Mom moved a small desk into the dining area so I could keep some belongings there. My bedroom downstairs became somewhere I visited during daylight. Ethan teased me less. He had started keeping his own curtains closed all the time. The activity faded. Christmas came. That holiday was difficult in our family anyway. Dad used to make a big deal out of it. He would put lights along the roof and play old records while cooking breakfast. After his death, Mom kept things simpler. That year, she finally brought out a box we hadn't opened since before Fairbanks. Inside were decorations Dad had made. Wooden stars, a badly painted snowman, an ornament with my name burned into it. There was also a small cassette recorder. Dad used it for work notes. Ethan found batteries. We played the tape. Most of it was boring. Measurements, addresses, lists of materials. Then, Dad's voice said my name. I remember all 3 of us becoming quiet. He had apparently recorded a reminder to buy me a birthday present. Nothing important. Still, hearing him unexpectedly felt like someone opening a door inside my chest. Mom cried. I cried. Ethan pretended not to. That night, I took the recorder downstairs. I wanted to hear Dad again privately. I sat on my bed with the lamp on. The curtains were closed. For about 20 minutes, I rewound and replayed the small part containing his voice. Eventually, the tape jammed. I stopped it. The room became quiet. Then the security lamp outside went out. That almost never happened. The opposite wall turned dark. I stood. A second later, the light returned. Something was standing at the window. I knew immediately. The outline was taller than before. Its head nearly reached the top of the frame. The left arm hung beside its body. The right was raised. One finger ended short. I couldn't breathe. The cassette recorder sat on the bed. Dad's voice had stopped only seconds earlier. I whispered, "You're not him." The silhouette tilted its head. Then the curtain moved inward. Not from air, from pressure. Something outside pushed against the glass hard enough to bow the fabric. I backed toward the door. The window latch lifted. I watched it. The small metal lever moved upward by itself. I screamed. The lower section of the window slid open 3 inches. Freezing air rushed in. The curtain lifted. Behind it, something pale appeared. Not a face, a hand. The skin looked almost colorless under the exterior lamp, but the strangest part was the fingertips. Each ended in a flat, oval pad with a dark ring around it, like smooth calluses arranged in concentric circles. The shortened finger had the same structure. It reached through the gap. I ran to the hallway. The bathroom door slammed shut in front of me. I turned toward Ethan's room. His door opened. He was already awake. Upstairs. We ran together. Behind us, something hit the floor in my bedroom. Not a crash, a heavy landing. Mom met us halfway up the stairs. Ethan shouted that someone was inside. She pushed us toward the kitchen and grabbed the phone. We locked ourselves in her bedroom. Mom called 911. While we waited, something moved downstairs. Slowly, the house was quiet enough that I could follow it. One step in the hallway. Pause. Another near the bathroom. The floorboards creaked under weight. Then, silence. Mom kept one hand over my mouth because I was crying too loudly. A sound came from the staircase. Not footsteps. A hand sliding along the wall. Dry skin against painted drywall. Higher. Closer. It stopped below the top step. Nobody moved. Then, Dad's voice came from the hallway. My dead father's voice. Not from the cassette. Not muffled. He said, "You okay, kiddo?" That was what he used to call me. Mom made a sound like she had been punched. I nearly opened the bedroom door. She grabbed me. Her nails dug into my arm. She whispered, "That isn't your father." Outside the room, something moved again. A faint dragging sound crossed the hall. It stopped directly on the other side of the door. The knob did not turn. Instead, 3 fingertips appeared beneath the gap at the bottom. Flat oval ends pressed against the carpet. They remained there for several seconds, then withdrew. Police lights eventually filled the front windows. Everything went quiet. Officers entered through the front. They searched the entire house. Nobody was there. My bedroom window was open. The screen had been removed. It lay inside the room. The surprising part was the screws. The screen had been secured from the exterior with 4 small metal fasteners. All 4 were still in place. The frame had somehow come through them without tearing. One curtain had been pulled partially from the rod. The cassette recorder was on the floor. The bedroom door had a dark smear around the lower hinge. Police searched the yard. Fresh snow covered everything. There were still no human tracks. But beneath my window were 4 depressions. Smooth ovals. The same kind we had found months earlier. They were deep enough to expose grass below the snow. An officer photographed them. He also took pictures of the screen. Nothing was stolen. No exterior door had been opened. The police report listed the event as possible attempted unlawful entry. We spent that night at a hotel. The next day, Mom called a contractor. She had him replace my bedroom window with a fixed pane that could not open. She also installed stronger lights around the property. For several weeks, nothing happened. We returned home. I moved permanently into the upstairs dining area. Mom said we would eventually change rooms properly, but we never did. My old bedroom remained downstairs with the door closed. The next incident involved Ethan. It happened in February. He came upstairs around 4 one morning holding his left arm. There were marks on it, 4 wide bruises near the wrist. They looked like someone had grabbed him. He said he woke because his blankets were being pulled toward the floor. At first, he thought I was playing a prank. Then he saw a hand wrapped around the edge of the mattress. He couldn't see an arm, only fingers, broad tips, gray skin. He kicked at it. The hand released him. He ran upstairs. Mom inspected his room. The fitted sheet had been torn from 2 corners. His desk chair had fallen over. A dark, oily mark ran across the wooden bed frame. That stain stayed. We tried cleaning it with soap, bleach, alcohol, even sanding. The wood remained discolored. Mom finally painted over it. Several months later, the stain showed through the paint. That was tangible evidence nobody could explain. After Ethan's experience, Mom stopped trying to convince herself we had an intruder. She never used the word haunted. Instead, she said the downstairs area was not right. We slept upstairs. Dad's belongings were moved from the garage into a rented storage unit. Mom thought maybe removing reminders of him would help. For almost a year, it did. Nothing major happened. Life became normal again. I started middle school. Ethan entered high school. We made friends. The fear slowly faded into something that felt distant. Then my mother made a decision she later regretted. She sold the red toolbox. Dad's old metal box had been sitting in storage for years. It was heavy, scratched, and filled mostly with electrical tools. Mom kept a few sentimental items, but decided someone should use the rest. A family friend bought it. The evening after she sold it, I came home from school and found my old bedroom door open. Nobody had been downstairs. The room was almost empty by then. Bed frame, desk, bookshelf, closed curtains. On the floor beneath the fixed window sat a red line. At first, I thought it was paint. I crouched. It was rust. Fine reddish dust formed a straight strip from one side of the room to the other. It ended at the wall below the glass. Mom vacuumed it. The next morning, it was back. Same place. She cleaned again. It returned. On the 3rd day, we noticed something on the wall. A handprint. Not dark, not bloody, just an area where the paint had become slightly dull. 5 fingers. One shorter. Mom covered it with primer. The shape reappeared through the new layer. She covered it again. Same result. Eventually, she hung a picture over it. That picture fell twice. The nail remained in the wall. The wire remained intact. After the 2nd time, she left the area bare. The serious confrontation happened when I was 12. By then, almost 2 years had passed since the first silhouette. It was early March. Snow still covered most of Anchorage. Mom had gone to pick Ethan up from basketball practice. I was alone for maybe 30 minutes. I stayed upstairs. I had no reason to go downstairs. Around 7, the power flickered. Lights dimmed. Then, returned. I heard something in the bathroom below. Water running. I ignored it. The sound continued. Eventually, I worried a pipe had burst. Mom had drilled basic emergency rules into us after Dad died. Know where the shutoffs are. Know where the fire extinguisher is. Don't ignore water. I called her. No answer. I stood at the top of the stairs. The lower hallway was dark. I switched on the light. Nothing. The water sound continued. I walked down slowly. The bathroom door was closed. I opened it. The sink faucet was off. Shower off. Toilet normal. The noise stopped. I turned to leave. Something touched the fixed window in my old bedroom. One dull contact. I stopped. The bedroom door was open. The room beyond was dim. The Yimka lamp made the curtains glow. A human outline stood behind them. inside the room. I knew because the shadow fell outward toward the glass rather than inward across the wall. It was between me and the window. I couldn't see the details, only the shape. Tall, one shoulder tilted, an arm hanging low. I backed into the bathroom. The figure moved toward the hallway. I shut the bathroom door. There was no lock. I held the handle with both hands. Nothing touched the other side. I tried calling Mom again. This time, she answered. I whispered that someone was downstairs. She told me to get out of the house if I could. I couldn't. The bathroom had only one small window, too narrow for me to climb through easily. Mom said she was 5 minutes away. She told me to stay quiet. Something moved outside the door. I heard the soft pressure of weight on carpet. Then the handle rotated. I pulled against it. The force on the other side increased, not suddenly. Steadily, my hand slipped. I wrapped both arms around the knob. The door opened half an inch. I screamed. A finger came through the gap. Flat pad. Dark ring. The shortened digit followed. The hand pushed farther. I kicked the door. It slammed shut against the fingers. There was no scream, no reaction. The pressure returned. I looked around for something to use. The toilet plunger. A ceramic soap dish. A metal towel bar. Nothing useful. The door opened again. This time, the hand came through near the floor. I stepped backward. The fingers gripped the edge. Wood cracked. Then, part of an arm appeared. The skin had a strange texture. Not rotten. Not injured. It looked stretched too tightly over something made of straight lines. As the elbow bent, the surface folded in narrow ridges instead of normal creases. The door moved farther inward. Behind it, I saw part of the figure. Its face finally entered the bathroom light. I have never forgotten it. The features weren't monstrous. That was what made it worse. The face looked unfinished. The eyes were normal in shape, but there were no lashes. The nose was slightly flattened. The mouth appeared too narrow for the jaw. Across the cheeks were thin, horizontal lines, like subtle seams beneath the skin. Every time it turned its head, those lines shifted independently. The left hand reached toward me. One index finger ended before the first joint. That detail nearly destroyed me, because despite everything wrong with it, my brain recognized my father. Not his face, not his body. Only that missing piece. The thing had copied the one physical feature I associated most strongly with Dad. I backed into the bathtub. It said my nickname. The voice was nearly correct, but it had no breath behind it. The sound came cleanly, like a recording played through a speaker. I started crying. Stop. It repeated the nickname, then reached for me. I grabbed the shower curtain rod and pulled. The rod tore loose. I swung it. The metal struck its shoulder. The impact sounded like hitting a wooden door. The figure jerked sideways. I swung again. This time, the rod caught its wrist. Its hand closed around the metal. The broad finger pads compressed with visible rings. I pulled. It pulled back. The rod bent between us. I screamed as loudly as I could. The thing stepped into the bathroom. Its leg moved strangely. The knee didn't bend forward smoothly. It seemed to shift sideways first, then lock into place. I threw the rod away and climbed into the tub. It reached across. One hand caught my pajama shirt near the shoulder. The fabric tightened. I tried twisting free. The grip dragged me forward. My chest hit the side of the tub. Pain shot through my ribs. I grabbed the faucet. The figure pulled harder. I kicked. My heel struck its face. The skin shifted sideways. Not the head, only the surface. For a fraction of a second, I saw something underneath. A pale structure made of narrow, overlapping plates. Not bone, not metal. I don't know what it was. Then, car headlights swept across the basement window. Mom, the thing released me. It turned its head toward the hallway. Mom entered through the kitchen upstairs. I heard her shouting. The figure backed out of the bathroom, not running, moving quickly with those uneven steps. I climbed from the tub and slammed the door. Seconds later, Mom came downstairs with Ethan behind her carrying a hockey stick. She found me sitting on the bathroom floor. The figure was gone. Police searched the house again. No intruder. The fixed bedroom window was intact. All doors remained locked. My shirt had a torn shoulder. 4 bruises developed across my upper arm. One mark was shorter than the others. The bathroom door had fresh cracks around the edge. The shower rod was bent nearly 30 degrees. Mom kept it. She still has it. The most disturbing evidence was discovered the following morning. Outside my old bedroom, snow had fallen overnight. The yard remained untouched. No shoe prints, no animal tracks. Nothing approached the house. But directly beneath the fixed pane were 5 deep oval impressions, not leading toward it, not leading away. Just 5 marks arranged like fingertips pressing upward from underneath the snow. Mom called a realtor within a week. We moved that summer. The house sold to a couple with no children. My mother never told them what happened. I asked her years later whether she felt guilty about that. She said she didn't know what she could have told them without sounding unstable. We moved to a newer home across town. Nothing followed us. No strange marks, no figures, no copied voice. For a long time, that convinced me the problem belonged to the old property. I grew up. Ethan moved to Washington. Mom eventually relocated to Oregon. I stayed in Alaska. The older I got, the less certain I became about my childhood memories. Fear exaggerates things. Children misunderstand shadows. Families influence one another. I accepted all of that. The photographs were harder to dismiss. Mom kept them. The bruises, the damaged door, the stains, the impressions beneath the window, the bent shower rod. Those things existed. Still, I learned to live without needing an explanation. My relationship with Dad's memory recovered slowly. For years, I couldn't look at photographs of his left hand. Seeing the shortened finger made me feel sick. Eventually, that changed. I started remembering the real person again. The man who made pancakes badly. The man who forgot where he left tools. The man who drove us to school when temperatures dropped so low the bus was delayed. The strange thing had borrowed one detail. It hadn't become him. Understanding that helped. When I was 28, my mother decided to sell some things she had kept in storage since we left Anchorage. She mailed me a box. Inside were family photographs, old school papers, a small wooden toy Dad had built, and several of his electrical notebooks. I spent an evening going through them. One notebook contained sketches of wiring routes from our old house. Apparently, Dad had worked on the place before we ever lived there. That surprised me. Mom had forgotten. He had been hired by the previous owner to repair electrical problems in the lower level. Most pages were ordinary diagrams. Then I found a rough drawing of the backyard wall. Beside my future bedroom window, Dad had written, "Void behind foundation. Not on plan." I called Mom. She didn't know what it meant. I contacted the current owners through public property records. I felt ridiculous doing it, but curiosity won. The owner, a man named Kevin, replied politely. I told him I had lived there as a child and asked whether they had ever renovated the downstairs rear wall. He said yes. They had remodeled several years earlier. I asked if they found anything unusual. He stopped replying. I assumed I had scared him off. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed my old bedroom during demolition. The drywall had been removed. Behind the wall was the concrete foundation. Below the window, workers had opened a rectangular section. There was a narrow cavity behind it. Not plumbing, not ductwork. An empty space extending downward farther than the camera could show. On the concrete around the opening were dozens of gray handprints. All the same shape. 5 wide fingers. One shortened. On the back of the photograph, Kevin had written only one sentence. My wife says it still stands outside the glass.